It all goes back to the ceremony when Nero was 12 years old and received the water crest. It was etched right onto his hand, and that one mark ended up deciding his entire fate. Everyone looked down on him because in the eyes of the public he was basically a failure, since the water attribute is known as a total bottom-tier crest. Young Nero just kneels there completely crushed, because that's just how the world works and everyone agrees he's weak. Fast forward to the present, and the party leader Guy is yelling in Nero's face, telling him he's officially kicked out. Guy isn't being nice about it either, shouting for Nero to pack his bags and get the hell out immediately, leaving Nero standing there at 17 years old, looking like his whole world just fell apart again. He can't believe he was just booted from his hero party, the path of glory. After everything, Nero begs Guy to reconsider, asking how he could do this after they've been together for a whole year. Guy looks at him like he's an idiot and asks if it isn't obvious. The reason is that Nero's water attribute is totally useless, and turns out they only kept him around this long just to have someone to supply them with water. But they just got their hands on a magic canteen that does his job for him. Guy gives him a cold look and tells him straight up that they just don't need him anymore. Nero tries to argue back, stuttering about how even magic canteens have a limit to how much they can hold, but Guy loses his temper and yells for him to shut up because he's heard enough. He points a finger right at Nero and shouts that he's never actually been any help in a real fight, so Guy stands tall in front of the rest of the group. He says he wasn't the only one who wanted Nero gone, then asks Fia Serena to back him up. Fia Serena looks at Nero with total disappointment, saying Guy is right and that Nero's magic will only hold them back from here on out. Even the saint won't help him, she just closes her eyes and says this must be the will of God. Guy tosses a bag of coins toward Nero, yelling that it's his severance pay since he doesn't want to deal with Nero whining about being treated unfairly later on, and the heavy bag hits the floor with a loud thud. Guy points at the door with a mean look and tells Nero to just take the money and get out of their sight, while he takes it a step further, demanding that Nero leaves the town entirely while the rest of the party just watches. Guy threatens that if he finds Nero still in town later, he'll personally crush him with everything he's got, leaving Nero standing there shaking. He looks down at the bag and asks what the hell he's supposed to do with that. Nero tries to stand his ground, saying he won't accept the money with those conditions, but Guy grabs him by the collar and tells him to shut his mouth. Guy's eyes are full of rage as he gets right in his face, stating that the money is strictly for his severance and nothing else. He makes it clear that he's not taking back something he's already given away, and ends it by telling Nero to just take the cash and get the hell out of there for good. Guy finishes his threat, yelling that Nero better move it if he doesn't want to get hacked to pieces, and Nero just stands there looking completely stunned, clutching the heavy bag of coins while reality finally starts to sink in. He eventually gives up and tells them he gets it, turning around to walk out the door for the last time. Nero finds himself standing in the middle of the town street, holding his severance pay and looking up at the sky. Just then, a local priest called Father spots him and asks why he looks so down, and Nero recognizes him right away. Nero explains that he actually just got kicked out of his party, which leaves the old man pretty surprised by the news. The father asks if he's still planning on being an adventurer despite everything that happened, and Nero gives him a smile, saying he's definitely staying in the game even if he's back to working alone now. The old man is glad to hear it, and asks if Nero can go back to helping the church out by providing them with water. He mentions that he has a lot of trouble getting his healing magic to work when he uses just any regular water. Nero tells the old man he'd be happy to help out with the water, and they head over toward the church together, walking through the quiet streets. Nero stops in his tracks when he sees something new on the property. He asks if that was actually there the last time he visited, but Father explains that they had a small earthquake just the other day, and apparently the ground sank, which caused this old structure to show up. He tells Nero that it's supposedly called a well from way back in the day, and ancient people used to use these things just to get their water. Father tells him to take a look if he's curious while he goes to find some bottles, so Nero says he's on it. Then he leans over the edge, figuring that water must have pooled at the bottom for the bucket to work, and decides he's going to try filling it up with some of his own magic. Nero starts casting his water supply spell right over the well and thinking about how water is everywhere now since every town has plumbing, making his magic feel even more useless, especially since it's only good for annoying monsters in a fight. He's always wondered if there was something more he could actually do, so he eventually figured out how to make water that restores mana. But that didn't help because Guy's rich hero party could already afford plenty of real potions, making his hard work feel pointless. Back at the well, Nero realizes that pulling up the heavy bucket is way harder than it looks, and suddenly the rough rope slips right through his fingers, so the bucket just drops, spinning fast as it falls straight down into the deep dark hole. Nero leans over the edge completely freaked out, watching as the church's bucket disappears. Nero stares down into the well, shocked at how the bucket just fell with way more force than he expected. So he starts wondering why it had so much momentum, and a crazy thought begins to click because in his head, he knows water isn't supposed to have any weight at all, right? He reminds himself that water having zero weight is just common sense for everyone in this world. And since things without weight don't have any real power, that's exactly why water magic is considered trash for fighting. He goes over the downsides, like how it can't burn things the way fire can, or how it doesn't have the strength to move objects like the wind does. And it definitely can't be used to build solid walls like earth magic, making it feel totally clear why everyone treats the water attribute like it's a joke. But he starts looking really serious as he thinks about what it would mean if water actually had weight. Nero stares down into the dark well, trying to convince himself that the bucket must have just been heavy on its own. So he pulls the rope as fast as he can, watching the pulley spin while the bucket finally reaches the top and slams down, splashing water all over the dry ground near his feet. He picks up the empty wooden bucket and realizes it's actually super light, which means his hunch was right because looking down from the top of the well, it all clicks. The heavy pull he felt before was definitely the weight of the water. Father shows up and jokes about how much Nero seems to like that well lately, catching him totally off guard. Nero starts yelling about making a massive discovery, which just makes the old priest ask what he's talking about, so Nero gets right in his face, looking completely serious as he tells him that water actually has weight. He stands there acting all hyped, while explaining his big breakthrough to the priest, and Father just closes his eyes and gives him a little smile, like he's just being nice about it. Father just laughs it off, saying it's a real surprise that Nero is finally starting to tell jokes, which totally catches Nero off guard, so he yells back that he's actually being 100% serious about this. He asks the priest to try pulling the rope himself. Father gives it a go and admits it actually takes some real muscle, so he figures it must be some kind of prank from the spirits, leaving Nero completely confused by that logic. Father asks if he's ever felt that heavy resistance when walking into a river, and explains that it only happens because water spirits like to mess with people and slow down their movements. Apparently, since Nero filled the well, the spirits probably just got curious and showed up to play around. The dry, rocky wasteland sits quiet under the sun as Nero thinks it over. He stands there alone, replaying the common belief that water has no weight and it's all just spirit mischief. Yet even though that's how everyone thinks the world works, he can't shake the feeling that something else is going on. Nero looks down at his open palms, thinking about how he just felt the physical weight of the water, realizing that until this moment, he was just letting the water flow without any real control. So he grips his staff and starts wondering what he can actually do if water has weight. Nero closes his eyes and focuses every bit of his awareness on that feeling of heaviness. And suddenly it clicks. He opens his eyes with total confidence, knowing he's got it. He calls out his water jet spell, and a high-pressure blast of water slams forward with crazy force. Nero stands there with his mouth hanging open, completely shocked by what he just did. He looks over at a massive boulder he just shoved across the ground and can't believe water moved something that big. Clenching his fist, he realizes his theory was right the whole time, so he just lets out a huge smile and cheers that water really is heavy after all. Nero thinks back to pulling water from the well, remembering how heavy that bucket was, realizing that more water just means more weight. He figures he's finally found the answer, and suddenly this mysterious voice tells him he's been blessed for finally figuring out how water actually works. His eyes light up with this weird energy as something major starts shifting. Nero snaps out of it looking totally confused, wondering what that voice he just heard was. He's pretty sure those words weren't just in his head, but then he looks down and can't believe his eyes. A glowing new mark is literally burning its way onto his hand. Nero starts panicking, yelling about where this thing even came from because it looks like nothing he's ever seen, and he definitely doesn't recognize the design, so he just stands there shook, knowing these crests are only supposed to show up during official ceremonies. Nero stares at the mark. He's never seen it before, but he just knows it's the sage's crest. He starts wondering if this whole thing is connected to that weird voice from earlier, but he decides to stop overthinking and just test this thing out, taking a deep breath to focus on all the water he pictured before, trying to pull every drop together into one spot. His eyes widen as he finally feels it clicking, knowing he's got the hang of it now, so he calls out his new spell, Water Ball, and this massive orb of water appears above him. The huge sphere of water just hangs there for a second, floating right over a big rock. Then it slams down all at once, hitting the ground with a loud, heavy crash. Nero can't believe it. He's just staring at the shattered rock, calling the power amazing because he finally sees that his water magic, which everyone said was trash, actually has crazy potential. Nero stands there thinking about his new spell. It's strong, but he realizes it's way too slow and bulky to actually hit a moving target. While he's lost in thought, a group of random adventurers shows up behind him, the leader calls out to him, using his weak attribute as a nickname. The three of them walk closer with smug looks on their faces, and the blonde guy asks Nero what he's even doing out here in the middle of nowhere. Nero turns around to face them, standing right by the rock he just destroyed. He just asks if they actually want something from him. The leader doesn't waste any time and brings up the fact that Nero got kicked out of the hero's party recently. He explains that he actually saw Nero leaving the hero's place earlier, and he noticed Nero was carrying a big bag of money. The guy keeps talking, saying he figured that bag was the severance pay Nero got for being fired, and then he starts mocking him, telling Nero that a loser with a water attribute doesn't have any use for that kind of cash. The girl in the group speaks up too, telling Nero to just hand the money over so they can spend it instead of him. Nero isn't backing down at all, he just asks them when exactly adventurers decided to start acting like common thieves. Nero doesn't hold back and tells the group that what they're trying to do is a straight-up crime. But the blonde leader just smirks right back at him, saying it's only a crime if they actually end up getting caught. The guy gets even more aggressive, telling Nero they can get rid of weak trash like him without even breaking a sweat. Nero looks at the guy's weapon and realizes he's dealing with a martial crest holder since he's carrying a sword, which is a bit different from his own magic. While magic crests use mana to give people elemental boosts, a martial crest works just by holding a weapon, letting the user pull off crazy moves by burning through their life force instead. The leader decides he's done talking and yells for them to finish this, activating a skill called Severing Enhancement as he draws his blade. Nero watches him move and realizes the guy is actually trying to kill him, so he says he can't just stand around and let that happen. He starts focusing his power, picturing the way he gathered water in that well and compressed it all together. Then he concentrates on forcefully releasing all that built-up pressure toward a single point to stop the guy's attack. Nero focuses all his energy into the small orb of water between his hands, saying it's time for some water magic, and he lets it rip, shouting "heavy water bullet" as a massive blast of pressure tears through the air. The shockwave is so intense that the three of them can barely stay on their feet, shielding their eyes from the spray. Once the mist clears, the female mage looks around in a panic, asking what the hell just happened. They all look down and realize the attack carved a giant crater right into the solid rock, leaving them completely losing their minds, just standing there yelling because they can't believe what they're seeing. Even Nero is a bit surprised by the results, seeing how he just became unrivaled, using what everyone calls the weakest magic. The leader starts sweating and points his sword at Nero, accusing him of cheating by hiding a magic bomb in his clothes. Nero just gives him a blank look and tells the guy straight up, that was definitely just water magic. But the leader isn't having it and screams that it's total bullshit, because there's no way water magic could ever hit that hard. The ground suddenly starts shattering under their feet. The trio loses it, wondering if a massive earthquake is hitting them right now. A huge geyser of water and rocks blasts straight into the sky, towering over everyone. The female mage points at the explosion and yells that water is just bursting out of nowhere, while the other two guys just stand there. Nero spots something small and round falling out of the sky through all that water spray. He jumps into action and tells everyone to watch out, reaching out to catch the object before it hits the ground. It turns out to be a little slime, and Nero looks pretty surprised to find it sitting right in his hands. He stares at the creature and asks where it even came from. The slime just looks up at him and lets out a tiny squeak. Nero puts it together and realizes his magic must have hit an underground spring, shooting the poor slime all the way up to the surface. He looks back at the water blast and admits he feels kind of bad for blowing the little guy out of its home. But the slime doesn't seem to mind at all and starts nuzzling his cheek. Nero just smiles and says it's a really friendly little thing. The blonde leader of the trio laughs and tells Nero it's great that a slime wants to join his party, even though he's clearly just being a jerk. He says it makes total sense that a water attribute loser would team up with a shitty trash slime, and the little creature actually seems to understand the insult. It starts vibrating with rage, while Nero desperately tries to tell the little guy to calm down before the female mage chimes in. She glares at them and calls the slime cheeky, clearly annoyed by everything that's happened. She yells at Nero, claiming he probably just rigged that last magic trick anyway, and she's not going to let it slide. She grabs for her staff and tells Nero she's about to teach him what real magic actually looks like, because she's convinced her wind magic is way better. She laughs and says there's no way water magic could ever block her attacks, but just as she starts to cast, the slime suddenly launches itself straight into the air. Nero lets out a yell of surprise as he watches the little guy fly up, and then the creature starts spinning like a crazy drill while screaming at the top of its lungs. The mage just stands there looking up, and before she can even move, the slime slams right into her face. It blasts a jet of water directly into her eyes, leaving her screaming about how much it hurts. Nero looks at the little slime and thanks it for the save. The creature just bounces around looking pretty proud of itself. Watching the little guy gives Nero an idea. He realizes that even tiny water drops can be lethal if you just fire enough of them together. But the archer from the trio has had enough. He reaches for another arrow and yells at Nero to knock it off. He doesn't waste any time and pulls his bow back, locking in a special martial arts skill he calls snipe. Nero doesn't flinch though. He holds up his hand as water orbs form on his fingertips, calling out his own move, water gun. The arrow flies through the air, but Nero's water shots are way faster. They collide midway and completely shatter the arrow into pieces. The archer just stands there with his mouth open. He can't believe his best shot just got trashed by a basic water spell. Before he can even react, the rest of the water blasts slam into his chest. The force is so strong he just lets out a scream. He hits the dirt hard with his armor cracked wide open. The blonde leader sees his buddy go down and starts to panic. The mage tries to step up and finish her wind spell, but she's shaking so much she can barely get the words out. The mage isn't backing down and swings her wand, shouting for a wind blade to cut Nero down. She doubles down on the pressure, calling out a wind hammer spell that sends a massive vortex spinning, but Nero is ready for it, calmly pointing his wand up and conjuring a huge water sphere in response. The two spells slam into each other with a massive crash, splashing water and wind all over the place. The mage is completely shocked. She can't wrap her head around how basic water just canceled out her wind. Nero just looks at her and explains that his water is actually heavy, which is why it packs so much power. She starts shaking and calls him an idiot, yelling that there's no way water can be heavy at all. She's losing it, screaming that water magic is useless for attacking, and he must be using some kind of trick, refusing to accept it. She charges up more energy and yells that her wind would never lose to just water. Nero grips his wand with both hands, telling her if she's using wind hammer again, then he's got a special move of his own. Nero lifts his wand and calls out his iron hammer of water spell. This massive sphere of water hangs over the mage, who just stands there totally frozen and scared. The spell crashes down with a huge splash and she screams as the heavy water hits her full force. The blonde swordsman can't believe what he's seeing. His teammate is face down on the rocks, completely out of it. Nero looks right at him with a calm smile, saying he's the only one left and asking what his next move is. The guy grunts and starts panicking, quickly reaching into his gear for a last resort while a magic circle glows around his feet. He yells that Nero is going to pay for this, but he vanishes into thin air. Nero just stands there, realizing the guy used a teleportation scroll to get away. He's not too worried about it, though. He just says he's going to report the whole group to the guild. Nero turns to the little slime and thanks it for fighting with him, and the little guy just chirps back happily. The little slime starts rubbing against Nero's leg, looking totally happy. Nero watches it and starts wondering if the little guy has actually gone attached to him, and if that's the case, he kneels down on the rocks to get on its level. He looks the slime right in the eyes and asks if it wants to come along with him on his journey. The slime starts bouncing all over the place, chirping and making happy noises. Nero just watches with a surprised smile, seeing how excited the little guy is to join up. And he can't help but smile, thinking to himself that maybe this was all fate. He quickly laughs it off as just a joke, but he's clearly happy about it. Nero reaches out to pet the little guy, asking what he should name it. The slime just tilts its head and chirps back, waiting to hear what he comes up with. He starts spitballing some pretty basic ideas, like calling it blues because it's blue, or maybe lime since it's a slime. He realizes those are kind of lame, and stops to think, remembering how the slime first appeared when the water came rushing out of the ground. Suddenly it hits him, and he tells the slime he's got the perfect name. He holds it up and asks if it likes the name Swim, and the little guy chirps like it's a done deal. Nero makes it official, telling the little guy that from now on its name is Swim. He's so hyped that he starts spinning Swim around in the air while it chirps happily. Swim just smiles, looking totally happy with his brand new name. Nero stops for a second, looking closely at Swim and wondering if the little guy just gave off a weird glow. But he watches the slime bounce around in his hands and decides he's probably just seeing things. He gives the slime a big hug and tells Swim they're going to be best friends from now on, and Swim just chirps back. Later on, Nero meets up with Fleur, who slams her hands down and yells about him getting attacked by those adventurers. She starts shaking Nero like crazy, asking if he's okay over and over until he finally tells her she needs to take a breath and calm down. As they talk about how crazy it is that registered guild members were acting like a bunch of highwaymen out there. Fleur gets a real serious look on her face and tells him she's going to report this and put out an official wanted notice on that trio. Nero looks pretty relieved to hear that and thanks her for looking out for him, but then Fleur notices what's on his shoulder and totally loses it, asking if that's a real slime sitting right there. Nero just plays it cool and explains he found Swim in the forest and decided to keep him since they got along so well. Fleur looks at the little slime and mentions that slimes like Swim are actually pretty common as pets, and she follows up by telling Nero she's just really glad he managed to make it back to the guild safely. She explains that even though those attackers were total scumbags, they were actually high-level guys, so it's crazy he outran them. Nero speaks up and corrects her, saying he didn't actually run away, he used his magic to fight them off while Swim chirps. Fleur just stares at him for a second, looking completely stunned by what he just said. Then she gets all worked up and tells him there's no shame in running because it's actually a really important tactic. She tells him he doesn't have to act tough for her and promises to get those guys caught, so Nero just awkwardly goes along with it. He realizes right then that he knew she wouldn't believe he actually won that fight on his own, but he just smiles, figuring he'll just have to change everyone's mind about water magic through his actions while Swim naps. Fleur shifts the subject after a moment and points out that he seems to be all on his own today. Fleur notices Nero is standing there alone and asks what happened to the rest of his party, which makes Nero pretty nervous as he admits he actually ended up leaving the path of glory. Fleur loses it and asks how that could even happen while Nero just tries to explain the whole mess. She takes a second to process it and realizes he didn't just leave, he actually got kicked out. She sighs and says she'll handle his withdrawal paperwork, mentioning Guy will probably come by later to finish his end. So Nero pulls out the completion certificate from the priest and asks if he can turn in a heavy bag of coins too. Fleur looks at the bag and is totally shocked by how much is in there, asking him where he even got it. Nero just gives her a casual smile and tells her it's basically like severance pay for being let go. Fleur thinks the hero's party is actually being super generous, but Nero just laughs it off. Then she gets serious again and points out that being a water user is going to make things really hard for him now. Fleur looks at Nero and says she's going to try her best to find him a decent party to join, but she's realistic about it, telling him there aren't many people out there willing to take in a water mage. She even admits that him getting into the hero's party in the first place was nothing short of a miracle. Nero appreciates the concern, but tells her not to worry because he's going to be just fine, and he's actually excited, saying he has a ton of things he wants to try now that he's got Swim by his side. Fleur smiles and tells him to let her know if he needs anything, while Nero waves goodbye and heads out. Stepping out into the town, Nero takes a deep breath and tells himself it's time to get started on finding a place to stay and some food, though it turns out Swim has already fallen fast asleep. The sun starts to set over the quiet rooftops of the town as the day finally winds down. Suddenly, a hand reaches out and grabs something with a quick, forceful motion. Guy walks up to the counter and tells Fleur he kicked Nero out, so he needs to process the withdrawal. But Guy is completely blindsided when Fleur tells him that Nero already came by and finished the paperwork himself. Fleur looks pretty upset, asking why Guy would even do that after they worked together for a whole year. Guy just brushes it off with an annoyed look, saying Nero simply wasn't a good fit for the party, and then he asks if the kid actually left town yet, which just makes Fleur stare him down even harder. Fleur snaps at him, asking what that's supposed to mean and saying Nero doesn't have to leave town just because he's solo. Some big guy suddenly puts his arm on Guy and says he disagrees, asking the hero Guy for some backup. The big guy keeps talking, admitting that he never really liked Nero in the first place, and he thinks it's a mistake to let a piece of garbage like that just run around their town. He starts pitching himself to Guy, saying he wouldn't mind joining the party since he'd definitely be more useful. The thug adventurer keeps laughing, calling Nero a piece of trash whose only use is making water, and Fleur tries to step in and shut it down. But Guy has already seen enough and moves in before punching the big guy right in the gut. He doesn't even hold back that much, and the thug starts gagging and coughing, barely managing to ask Guy what he's doing. So Guy looks him down with a total look of disgust, telling the guy that since he couldn't even dodge a punch while Guy was holding back, there's no way a small fry like him would be useful. Then he makes it clear that the only people who get to talk trash about Nero are his former party members, and tells the thug to stop acting like he knows the kid when he's really just some random nobody. He looks like he's actually ready to snap, telling the big guy flat out that he'll kill him. The thug is shaking now, trying to act tough by telling Guy not to get cocky just because he's the hero. The thug adventurer is totally backing down now, and then Fia Serena speaks up from the background saying she completely agrees with Guy. She points her staff right at the guy's face, making it clear that if he says even one more word, things are going to get violent. Fia Serena starts charging up her magic with a scary look, asking if he wants to find out what it feels like to get blown up, while the saint just stands there watching with a cold stare. The guy finally loses his nerve and books it out of the guild, screaming that he was wrong and he's leaving as the hero party stands their ground. Fleur stays behind looking a bit puzzled, like she just noticed something weird about how the whole situation went down. She starts thinking back on Guy's reaction, wondering if it's just her imagination, or if Guy was actually trying to protect the kid he just kicked out. It really makes her wonder if there's actually some secret reason behind why Nero was exiled from the hero's party in the first place. But meanwhile out in the forest, Nero is busy testing out a brand new move he called Heavy Water Bullet, and as he lets it rip, the magic hits with a massive crash, absolutely leveling the trees in front of him and leaving a huge path of destruction. Nero just stands there with a big smile on his face, saying that the spell he came up with yesterday seems to be working out perfectly. Swim suddenly starts jumping towards some trees nearby, so Nero looks over and asks the little slime what's wrong. Nero spots a big piece of fruit hanging from a branch and asks if that's what Swim wants to eat. Noticing how the slime really loved the fruit that came with their dinner the night before, it makes Nero realize that trying to climb a tree in his current adventurer outfit is going to be a massive pain. But then he hears a weird sound and just watches in total shock as Swim stretches out a long liquid arm all the way up to the high branch to snag the fruit. Nero gets hyped up and tells Swim it's amazing that a slime can even do things like that. While thinking about how Swim is actually capable of a lot of stuff, like shooting and stretching, even though the slime's body is literally just made of water. And as Nero says that out loud, the word water hits him like a ton of bricks. He looks completely stunned, like he just figured out a massive secret. Nero starts rubbing his chin and muttering about how he can definitely apply that idea to his own magic, leaving Swim just standing there looking confused. Nero stands there with water orbs floating all around him and suddenly shouts that he's finally figured it out. He calls out his new spell, Water Whip, and thick strands of water explode out from his body in every direction. It actually works. And Nero watches in shock as the liquid whips wrap around trees and pick up rocks and branches like they're solid. He laughs and says this new trick might actually be super useful, while Swim pokes him with its own little water arms. Nero makes sure to thank the slime, telling Swim he owes this whole idea to him, and the little guy just chirps back happily. He's pumped because now they can keep taking on guild requests just like he used to do before. The two of them look totally ready for anything, and Nero tells Swim that they're going to give it everything they've got. The scene shifts back to the town where the sun is shining over the rooftops of the buildings. Someone is sorting through a stack of papers at the guild, looking for the right job for the duo to take on. Fleur holds up a G-rank sheet with a big smile and asks if they want to try out a herb gathering quest. Fleur offers up a quest for gathering herbs, and Nero just stands there blankly repeating the words. He snaps out of it and yells that a job like that is strictly for total rookies. Even though he's working solo these days, he points out that his official rank is still E. He insists he can handle a real quest for his level. But Fleur just looks at him and hums, clearly not buying it. She levels with him and says the only reason he even survived those dungeons was because his friends were there to protect him. She reminds him that Guy and the rest of his old party were all D-rank adventurers, so there is no way things are going to be that easy now that he is on his own. Nero looks down, thinking to himself that he actually can hold his own in a fight now. But he stops because he realizes he hasn't actually shown Fleur that his water magic works yet. He stands there at the counter knowing he's going to need some kind of proof that he can really fight. Nero has a sudden realization and yells for Fleur to look at his right hand, claiming a second crest finally showed up, but Fleur just stares at him, looking completely drained as she tries to find the right words to say. She asks him exactly where this crest is supposed to be, even though Nero is holding his hand right in front of her. Nero gives a shaky reply, starting to get worried that she's actually being serious about not seeing it. He shoves his hand even closer to her face, insisting it's right there, until Fleur finally just gives in and says she sees it. She mutters to herself about Nero being at that age where kids start acting weird, which leaves him totally confused. Fleur keeps going, saying she understands how he feels like some special secret power is finally waking up inside him. She laughs it off as a phase that every teenager goes through, while Nero just loses it, realizing she thinks he's just making stuff up. He looks down at his palm in total shock, wondering why she can't see the mark and how this is even possible. Fleur gets back to business and tells Nero that while she won't stop him from taking a different quest, she's still worried about him. Fleur looks Nero right in the eye and tells him to think it through. He needs to be careful about what he picks next. She warns him that while people say getting hurt is part of the life, being reckless doesn't do an adventurer any favors. Nero just looks at her and says her name, clearly feeling the weight of her advice, while he admits to himself that even with his water magic, he only got his first taste of real combat yesterday. He starts looking through the papers on the desk, hoping to find a job that actually fits his experience level, and then he spots a request for gathering magic herbs. It pays 500,000 Marin for 2,500 blue roses. He realizes that while they're asking for a massive amount of flowers, the money is definitely worth the effort. Since the pay is on a different level, Nero assumes the job is going to be way harder than just picking normal herbs. He considers the rank and the fact that the forest isn't known for having any super dangerous monsters. so it seems like the perfect way for him to finally put his current abilities to the test. Nero holds up the request form and tells Fleur he wants to take this job, but she looks pretty unsure about it and mentions that while it's a rank E quest and doesn't usually have any crazy monsters, there's still a catch because the area is full of plant monsters that hide in the scenery, which makes going out there alone pretty dangerous. Nero just gives her a big smile and says he'll be totally fine since he has swim with him, and the slime chirps in like she's ready to go. Fleur looks at the little creature and admits she's definitely cute, but she still wonders if a slime can actually hold its own in a fight. Nero tells her that Swim is actually super reliable and even saved his life when those rogue adventurers jumped him, so Fleur starts to change her mind, saying she never thought this kind of slime could fight, but Swim seems pretty special. She finally gives in and says that since Nero is officially the right rank for the job, she can't really stop him from taking it. She still tells him to be extra careful out there and reminds him to stock up on potions if he's got the cash, and Nero just laughs it off and says he's on it as he starts heading out, leaving Fleur looking a little worried behind the counter. Fleur suddenly remembers something about the hero's party from the day before, but she realizes Nero is already gone and panics a bit. Meanwhile, out in the middle of the busy town district, Nero is walking around and asks Swim if she wants to grab a bite before they head out for the quest. They stop at a stall where Nero picks up an apple, noticing how much the little slime actually loves fruit, so he makes a mental note to stop by the church later to grab some recovery potions from the priest. Suddenly, a loud voice cuts through the crowd as Guy yells out Nero's name from across the street, and Nero stops and looks back to see who it is while Swim keeps munching on her snack. It's Guy, and the dude looks absolutely furious for some reason, standing there with his teeth clenched until he starts screaming, asking why Nero is still in town when he specifically told him to get lost. Nero just stands there looking completely annoyed, clearly not in the mood for Guy's drama right now. Nero looks over at the little slime on his shoulder and tells Swim he's going to introduce her, acting like Guy isn't even standing right there. He points out the group, calling out Guy the hero, Fia the mage, and Serena the healing mage, basically laying out who everyone is. Guy just stares Nero down with a look of pure confusion, asking what that tiny thing is supposed to be. Nero doesn't miss a beat, explaining that her name is Swim and they just met by chance yesterday, but Guy just keeps glaring like he's trying to burn a hole through them. Nero notices the attitude and asks if he's got a problem with her, so Guy loses it, yelling that there's nothing left to talk about and demanding to know when Nero is finally leaving town for good. Nero keeps his cool, looking Guy straight in the eyes while he says he actually has no intention of leaving at all. He explains that this is the very first town where he became an adventurer. It's basically his hometown now, and he isn't going anywhere just because Guy said so. He says it one more time to make sure it sinks in, which leaves Guy standing there looking completely pissed off, barely able to contain his frustration with Nero. Guy grips his pendant so hard his hand starts shaking, telling Nero that with the skills he has, there's just no way he's going to make it as an adventurer in a town like this. He tells Nero he should just pack up and head west to Noland. Nero just looks up, totally confused by where this is coming from. Guy explains it's just a quiet country spot without any scary monsters, but then he adds that the guild there is full of nice people too. Nero starts to realize something and asks Guy if he's actually just worried about him. Guy completely freezes up while the girls just watch the tension. Guy suddenly snaps, yelling at Nero to stop messing around or he'll cut him down right there, making Nero realize that can't be right. After all, Guy was the one who kicked him out in the first place. Nero decides to change the subject, holding up the slime and asking Fia if she wants to pet Suimu, which totally catches her off guard. Nero says the little guy loves attention, so Fia blushes and acts like she's only doing it because he asked. Serena watches Fia holding the slime and asks if she can have a turn petting him too, while Guy stands in the back looking completely furious. Nero notices the glare and wonders if Guy is just mad that they're all playing with Suimu. Serena asks Nero where he's headed next, and he tells her he was planning on stopping by the church to get some water infused with healing magic. She asks if he's already got the water ready to go. Nero tells her he does, so Serena just tells him to hold on to the bottles for a second, catching him off guard as she closes her eyes and starts focusing, her staff glowing with a bright light right over the water. She finishes the spell and tells him she's imbued it with healing magic herself, making Nero ask if she's actually sure about giving him something so valuable. Serena smiles and brings up how he left some of his own magic water behind for the party when he left the hero's house, and explains that helping him out like this is just her way of saying thanks for everything he did. Nero looks pretty surprised, admitting he thought they would have just thrown his water away. He's clearly happy to hear they're actually using it. Guy gets in Nero's face and yells at him to just take the gift, since Serena went through all that trouble to make it for him. Nero can barely get a word in and he finally thanks them, promising to take really good care of the water while Serena and Fia look on with smiles. Serena tells him he better use it the second he finds himself in any real danger, while Guy stands off to the side looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Fia finally hands the slime back over to Nero, calling the little guy Neroswim as she blushes a bit, telling Nero she really appreciates him letting her pet the little creature. Guy starts walking off and barks at the girls that they've got a schedule to keep. He tells them they're moving out right now, but then he stops for a second and says Nero's name, catching the kids' attention. Without even looking back, Guy tells him he needs to just get out of this town and move on, so he adds that they at least got to find a cute pet out of this whole mess. Nero realizes Guy is talking about Suimu, and teases him for thinking the slime was cute. Guy's face turns bright red as he screams that he definitely didn't think that at all. Guy is losing it, his face turning bright red as he screams that he's going to hack Nero to pieces for the cute comment, and then he finally turns around to leave with the girls, while Nero stands back and watches them walk away into the distance. Nero gets a bit serious, thinking to himself that Guy's rough words actually sounded more like a warning than anything else, but he also notices that nobody in the party could even see his new crest. He just smiles at Suimu and says they should probably head out too. The town is busy with people moving through the market, but there's a guy standing off to the side watching everything with a cold look. As Guy and the girls walk past a brick building, a man in a black hood stops them by saying it's been a long time since they last met. Guy stops dead in his tracks with a look of pure annoyance on his face, while Serena and Fia just look confused about what's going on. It turns out the man's name is Hilton. He just stands there leaning on his cane and looking at the group like he's got an edge on them. Hilton adjusts his glasses and mentions he was watching them earlier, adding that Guy seemed to be acting pretty friendly with Nero, so Guy grits his teeth and snaps back, telling the old man that spying on people like that is honestly just in bad taste. Guy looks away while Hilton fixes his glasses, mentioning that the master is starting to run out of patience. Things are getting pretty tense as the old man asks Guy what he's actually trying to pull here. An image of Nero smiling with the slime on his head pops up, but Hilton just calls him trash and says he can't believe the kid is still alive. Hilton gets a scary look in his eyes, reminding Guy that he was supposed to get rid of Nero and asking why he's hearing that the kid is still walking around. Guy just looks down and replies that they already did enough by kicking him out of the party, but he quickly makes sure to tell the old man not to get the wrong idea. It's not like they were actually friends. Hilton stops to think about the word exiled for a second while Guy just stands there with his eyes closed, waiting for the old man to understand that being kicked out of the hero's party means Nero's reputation is completely trashed. He says the kid is basically socially dead now, so whoever is pulling the strings should be happy with that result. But Hilton doesn't buy it at all. He snaps back that the master doesn't want that at all, and tells Guy he should have known better. Hilton watches Nero walk away through the window, muttering that the master won't let such trash stay alive. He explains Nero was only exiled because he was too gross for the master to even touch, let alone get his hands dirty killing him, which is exactly why Guy was ordered to do the job. Hilton fixes his glasses and tells Guy that choosing social death over actual death is a problem and way too lenient. He gets right in Guy's face, asking if he's really planning to defy the master. Fia Serena stands nearby looking totally stressed out while the tension in the room keeps building. Guy tells him he isn't trying to rebel, but he needs the old man to actually use his head since the party is finally getting famous. He explains that killing a teammate, even a useless one, would completely ruin their image. He argues that Lord Jairil should want to benefit from their success, and the Lord definitely wouldn't want a stupid move like a murder trial trashing his own reputation. Hilton rubs his chin and admits that Guy actually makes a pretty good point, explaining that if Guy, who was basically adopted by the Axis family, can actually make it as a top-tier hero, then the master will definitely be proud of him. The old man turns around to leave, telling the group he gets where they're coming from, but that doesn't change the fact that the master isn't going to be happy with just a reputation boost. He looks back with a cold stare and says since Guy won't do it, he'll be the one to kill Nero. Guy loses it and starts yelling, asking why the hell he's making crazy decisions like that on his own, but Hilton just ignores them and keeps walking, even as Guy and Fia Serena shout for him to stop. While all this is going down, Nero is just walking around with his slime friend on his head, totally unaware of the danger, as the sun shines through the quiet forest trees. Nero makes his way deep into a quiet part of the forest filled with roses, but he isn't alone, as a group of tree monsters starts moving in the grass. One of the big ones lets out a rough groan while the others just watch, forcing Nero to act fast. He calls out his water gun spell and sends sharp jets of water blasting right into the monsters. He looks pretty satisfied with the hit, watching the water droplets fly everywhere, but then he almost loses his footing. He yells out as he has to dodge some vines suddenly lashing out at him from the dirt. Nero fires off another water gun to keep them back, splashing the water against the thorny vines crawling his way. He stops to think for a second, realizing that even though treants are huge targets, fighting plant types like this is a real pain, mostly because monsters that blend into the woods are basically impossible to aim at properly. He considers his options, but knows he can't use water ball or water hammer since the blast would probably destroy the blue rose he's trying to find. On top of that, he remembers that his water whip didn't do a thing to those vine types earlier, leaving him stuck trying to figure out a better plan. Nero stops to think, realizing that cutting is usually the best way to handle vine monsters. But he realizes that even his smaller or more flexible spells like water gun and water whip still have a lot of power. He starts focusing his energy, figuring that if the weight of the water doesn't change when it shifts, then he should be able to make the stream way thinner and sharper to get the job done. Nero stands his ground in the clearing as he lets the new magic fly, and the pressurized water slices through the thick forest vines like a razor. Looking pretty confident, Nero officially names his new move Water Sword, telling the slime that this should make fighting plant monsters a total breeze while the little guy cheers him on. Fighting isn't really the main problem anymore though, because Nero just thought of a huge setback, wondering how they'll even carry 25-0 blue roses back, especially since they've only gathered 200 so far. Nero sits by the trees looking pretty stressed, thinking about how hard it's going to be to gather all those roses while dealing with monsters. But when he looks over, he's confused because the pile of blue roses just vanished. He asks where they went while Swim lets out a tiny burp, and then the slime just spits the whole pile back out. Nero is totally shocked by what he's seeing, realizing that Swim's body can actually store things inside of it. He's hyped because this makes their whole mission way easier than he thought, so he tells the little guy that even though it's a big job, they just have to keep pushing until it's finished. Swim chirps back and they get back to work. After a while, Nero checks their progress and sees they only have 200 left to go, telling Swim that once they grab the roses in this area, they'll finally be done for the day. But just as things are looking up, the ground starts shaking like crazy. Nero nearly loses his balance and Swim clings to his shoulder while a massive mound of earth starts swelling up right in front of them. Nero can't believe what's happening, as giant thorny vines suddenly burst through the rocks, trapping Nero in the middle of a new fight. The giant plant monster opens its mouth wide, showing off rows of sharp teeth standing way taller than Nero and spreading its vine-covered limbs everywhere. Nero says this thing looks like a really dangerous opponent while Swim stays asleep, but the monster doesn't wait, firing a massive thorny vine pod right at them. Nero pulls out his water sword magic to try and block the incoming attack, but the force is too much. His sword shatters and he gets sent flying back. He grits his teeth, thinking about how this monster is totally different, realizing that if he hits the ground at this speed, he's basically done for, so Swim jumps into action, growing into a giant cushion as they fall together. Nero lands perfectly on the giant slime, safe from what would have been a bad hit. Nero looks down in total shock, asking if it just got way bigger while the slime shrinks back down. Nero tells Swim thanks for the save, but then he notices Swim is actually a whole size smaller than she was before, just as the plant monster lets out a huge roar and gets ready to attack. Nero groans from the pressure, feeling like he's in a really bad spot, asking himself if he's actually got what it takes to beat something this big, but then he stops, telling himself he isn't some weak water mage anymore. He figures Swim shrank because she protected him, so he can't keep relying on her like that. He says he has to find his own way to stay safe, thinking about how if he can make a water sword, he can probably do more. The plant monster lashes out with its thorny vines from every side. Nero stands his ground as he calls out his Water Guardian's shield spell, creating a massive barrier of water that blocks the heavy strikes just in time. Nero looks through the water, glad the magic actually worked, but watching the vines slam against his shield makes him realize that just defending isn't going to get the job done. He's been holding back his strongest spells to keep his friends safe, but he decides he can't afford to play it safe anymore. He starts a new chant for a huge attack called Heavy Water Bullet, and the massive blast of water completely wrecks the monster, clearing out all those annoying vines in one shot. Nero gets ready to hit the main body next, but right as he goes for it, a fresh vine sprouts back out from the stump like it was never even hurt. Nero can't believe it, realizing the thing just keeps regenerating forever. The massive plant monster suddenly stops its direct assault, and Nero watches as the thorny vines start retracting. Nero is confused for a second, wondering why the thing is pulling back right when the bulb at the center of the monster snaps open, firing a bunch of pods straight up into the sky. Nero looks up through his shield and realizes the real attack is coming from above. A thick, dark liquid starts raining down in a heavy downpour, splashing hard against his Water Guardian shield. As the fluid hits the floor, it starts sizzling and eating through all the grass and leaves nearby. Nero jumps back to keep his feet clear of the spray, realizing the liquid is actually acid. He knows he's completely done for if even a drop hits his skin, but while dodging, he catches something interesting about the way the monster is positioning itself. He thinks he sees a regular pattern and gets ready to make his move. Nero stands back as the ground beneath the plant monster starts to shake, and a massive thorny vine whips out, forcing Nero to sprint across the rocks to stay clear of the strike. He looks back with a smirk and asks if the monster really thought it had him cornered. He tells the beast it's got the whole situation backwards because he's the one who lured it here. Nero points his hand out and launches a massive blast of water that completely soaks the plant monster's main bulb, and it was actually Nero's first time trying to change the attribute of his magic like this. But it worked perfectly. It was just like making magic water by using his mana, and the monster's leaves start sizzling immediately. Nero realized earlier that the beast was afraid of its own acid, so he turned that weakness against it to finish the fight. Nero stands back as the monster melts into a dark puddle. He says he moved the fight earlier so the blue roses wouldn't get ruined. Looking down at the mess, he spots something glowing in the middle of the sludge and picks it up, realizing the creature actually dropped a magic stone. He takes a second to sit down with the little slime, suddenly remembering that the little guy got hurt during the chaos. Nero checks himself over and says he's all good now, mostly because he has Serena to thank for her help, but he gets worried seeing how small the slime Swim has gotten and asks if it's really okay. The little guy just bounces around happily, so Nero asks if it wants a dose of the water of life to recover. Swim just shakes its head no, which leaves Nero a bit confused about what it actually needs, until he asks if it just wants a normal drink of water instead. The slime immediately dives in and starts slurping the water right out of Nero's cupped hands. Swim bounces around with a happy chirp, and Nero can't believe it. It turns out that just giving the little guy some water is all it takes to get him back to normal. Nero decides it's time to wrap things up, so he tells Swim they should finish gathering the roses and finally get out of there. Moving on, the scene shifts back to the town where the large guild building stands inside. The guild staff look totally stunned by what they're seeing. Fleur asks if everything was really inside the slime, and the guild worker admits he's never seen one do that. Nero just smiles, confirming that's the whole haul. While they're still in shock, Nero holds up the magic stone he found and asks if they want to take a look at the loot from the monster he took down. Fleur says that would be a huge help since they can use it to identify the creature, so she prepares to hand it over to the team in charge, while the guild worker mentions that checking out all those blue roses is going to take a solid 2 or 3 hours. Nero figures that's fine and tells Swim they might as well go find some late lunch while they wait for the results. He starts to head out with the slime on his shoulder, but suddenly someone calls his name from across the room, making him stop and look back. Fleur stares at the magic stone, looking totally floored. She asks if Nero was really the one who took down the monster it came from, and Nero just gives her a casual smile, confirming he handled it using his water magic. The guild staff stay quiet, completely stuck in place while Nero tells them he'll just head out and come back later. The guild worker starts laughing in the back, saying that water is way too weak for real combat and Nero's gotta be joking, but everyone knows magic stones are a huge deal. They're super rare items that only show up in specific mines every once in a while. Powerful monsters and beasts carry them too, but those creatures are usually way too tough for a normal person to handle. Fleur looks down at the crystal in her hand, realizing that if Nero actually got his hands on this, then the stone is basically the ultimate proof that he really killed the monster. She still can't wrap her head around it, wondering if he really did something that crazy with an element as weak as water. While the guild is busy freaking out, Nero just strolls through town and asks Swim if they should go kill some time or just grab lunch first. Swim is in a great mood, making happy little squeaks while Nero walks along holding him close. And Nero notices the slime is acting just like before, so he asks if it's time for some fruit or maybe a drink with lots of water. But as they turn a corner, Nero spots 3 people in heavy cloaks just standing there in the middle of the street. Thinking they look way too shady to be up to anything good, he decides they should probably just steer clear and keep walking. Just as he tries to move past, one of the cloaked guys suddenly steps right in front of him, and Nero's heart drops when he realizes he's walked right into a trap. He lets out a yell as a hand reaches out and snatches Swim right off his shoulder in one quick move, yelling for Swim to come back. Nero realizes his body feels totally heavy and weird while he watches the thief bolt with his friend. The guy disappears around the corner of the tall buildings, but Nero isn't about to let them get away, so he forces himself to run and chases the 3 cloaked figures down the alley. Nero stops dead in his tracks, looking completely shocked at the group blocking his path in the alleyway. The big thug from the guild stands there with his arms crossed, acting all smug while he says hi and mentions how Nero seems to be doing pretty well for himself. Nero is fuming, demanding to know why they'd mess with Swim and what they're even trying to pull by luring him out here. The thug just grins and explains that the cloaked guys are his underlings, and because of Nero, they aren't even allowed to be adventurers anymore. He says that as their boss, he can't just sit around and let some little punk like Nero disrespect his crew, so he's taking it personally. He adds that because of Nero, Guy ended up humiliating him in front of everyone back at the guild. Nero looks at him like he's crazy, asking what some grudge against Guy has to do with him specifically. He just can't believe this guy would go through all this trouble and kidnap his friend over some petty resentment. So Nero points at the underlings and tells the boss he doesn't even know who those guys are. That really sets them off, and the blonde leader of the trio starts screaming, asking if Nero is trying to screw with them. The trio stands together in the alley, the blonde leader looking stressed while holding Swim as his friends scowl. Nero finally puts the pieces together, asking if they're the same ones who tried to jump him before, which really sets the blonde guy off. He asks if Nero finally remembers and screams about how they're treated like wanted criminals because of him. The archer jumps in too, complaining that they can't even join the guild and other adventurers are hunting them down, but Nero doesn't care. He just looks at them and asks if all those problems aren't actually their own fault. The big boss ignores the bickering and gets to the point telling Nero to hand over every cent he's got. He acts like he's entitled to it, saying it's just compensation for all the trouble Nero caused his guys, while the blonde leader adds that they know he finished the Blue Rose quest. They've done their homework and know he's carrying a big reward. He looks at Nero with total disgust, saying he doesn't know what kind of cheap trick a trash water mage like him used, but he's decided that he'll be the one taking that reward for himself. Nero looks at them with total disgust, asking since when adventurers started acting like a bunch of low-life bandits. The blonde leader is losing his cool, clutching the sleeping Swim while screaming at Nero, asking if he even gets how bad of a spot he's in. He demands to know what Nero's choice is going to be, but Nero just stands his ground and asks what happens if he refuses. That's when the big guy steps up with a nasty look, threatening to kill the slime first before finishing Nero off too. Nero doesn't flinch, warning them that if they try a stunt like that in the middle of the city, they'll be hunted down and ended in a heartbeat. The blonde leader's face goes dark with a creepy smile, telling Nero he better drop the act if he thinks they aren't actually ready to kill him. The big thug just laughs it off, saying that getting rid of one kid and a tiny slime isn't going to be a problem for them at all. The female mage joins in with the same dark look, mentioning they already have a cleaner who handles making bodies disappear. The archer adds a gross comment, saying it's a shame Nero isn't a girl because they could have had some real fun with him. The big guy gives him one last choice to pay up or die, and Nero just looks down and tells them fine, seemingly giving in. Water splashes everywhere as Nero makes his move, catching the guys completely off guard while the blonde leader gets hit right in the face. He's blinded and totally loses his cool for a second. Nero doesn't waste any time, yelling out for a water whip and swinging a long stream of water toward the leader. The guy can't even see what's happening as Swim gets yanked right out of his arms. Nero catches the little slime and tells him welcome back, and Swim just makes a happy little sound, glad to be safe again. The archer is fuming though, complaining about Nero using more of those weird magic tricks, so he and the mage both launch an attack at once, firing off wind blades and a triple shot of arrows. Nero just stands his ground and calls out a guardian shield. A huge wall of water appears and blocks everything they throw at him. The two of them just stare, totally shocked that their best hits did absolutely nothing, and that's when Nero holds up his hand, starting his next spell to show them he's not playing around. Nero doesn't give them a chance to breathe and calls out his water gun spell, firing off high-pressure blasts that hit the archer and the mage right in the face. They're both completely soaked and struggling to see. But the blonde leader isn't done yet, jumping down from a roof to ambush Nero from behind with his sword, though Nero manages to sidestep the attack just in time, making the guy slam his blade into the ground. The leader just grins and says he might have dodged once, but now Nero is right in his hitting range. He triggers a martial art called Severing Enhancement to finish the job, but Nero blocks the strike with a solid blade of water. The leader is losing his mind, asking how it's possible to make a sword out of water, but he tries to act tough, saying no matter the trick, he's still the better swordsman. He doesn't get to prove it though, because he starts yelling about his eyes getting burned again as the water spray catches him off guard, leaving him totally open and doubling over in pain. Nero stands over the fallen leader, letting him know he only used the flat of his water blade to knock him out. The archer watches from the side and says he finally gets it. Nero just acts like his water magic is useless so he can use cheap tricks. He starts talking trash, calling Nero's style a cowardly and petty way to fight that fits a piece of garbage like him. Nero doesn't let it get to him and points out that the guy's friends are already down for the count, so he should probably just give up. The archer just laughs and says Nero's got jokes, but he's about to drop some bad news. He brags that he's actually the strongest one there, so strong that even if his whole team tried to jump him, they wouldn't have a prayer. Nero is caught off guard, wondering if the guy was hiding that spear in a magic bag this whole time. The archer grins and says his crest is actually the spear, and he's ready to show off a special move. He leaps into the air and triggers a martial art called Knigh Spear, making the weapon stretch out to a crazy length. Nero grabs Swim and yells as the massive spear comes crashing down right on top of him. The archer starts bragging, saying the real strength of a spear is all about having more reach than the other guy, and his special martial art lets him extend that distance even further than normal. He lets out a yell, claiming he's basically invincible as the giant spear slams right into Nero's water shield. The guy gets annoyed and accuses Nero of being a coward, saying there must be an iron plate hidden inside that water magic. He decides he'll just pierce right through whatever is there, so he starts spinning the weapon and calls out his spiral spear strike, launching a high-speed drill attack. Nero's water barrier takes the full force of the hit. It's a massive amount of pressure pushing against his hand. He can see the tip of the spear grinding away at the water, and it's starting to look shaky. The archer admits the shield is actually pretty tough, but wonders how long it'll last if he just keeps hitting it. Nero realizes that against a spear like that, his defense is going to break. Nero stands firm behind his barrier, trying to figure out how to counterattack while keeping his magic under control, since he doesn't want to cause a scene in the city. He notices the guy's spear is moving way faster than he can cast his spells, and starts wishing there was a way to strike back without losing the shield's protection. Suddenly, an idea hits him. He realizes he doesn't have to choose between offense and defense. If he uses water magic, it might just pass right through his water shield, so he yells out for a water spear and fires a high-speed blast of water from inside his barrier. The guy barely dodges it and loses his mind, completely shocked that Nero could even do that. He calls Nero a coward for hiding a trick like that up his sleeve, but he's already jumping back into the fight, calling out a Rui flurry and unleashing a crazy barrage of stabs. Nero stands his ground, reminding the guy that he already said this is water magic, while he unleashes a water spear barrage, sending a bunch of high-speed projectiles straight through his shield. The thug adventurer starts losing his temper, yelling about how much Nero is pissing him off. He deflects the spears and brags that a move like that won't work against a spear crest bearer like him. But Nero is already a step ahead and calls out his water whip, sending long coils of water snaking around the guy's defenses. The thug completely freezes up as he sees the water closing in, realizing too late that the first attack was just a distraction to hit him from a blind spot. The water wraps tight around his limbs, but he still tries to act tough, shouting that the trick is useless. Nero just stands there looking totally calm and tells the guy that the fight is already over, asking him with a serious look if he had any idea just how heavy water can really be. The thug adventurer looks up at the massive ball of water and yells that there is no way water is actually heavy, but Nero doesn't wait and calls out his iron hammer of water spell, sending the whole weight of the water crashing down on the guy. The sound of the impact is so loud it probably carries across all the rooftops in this part of the city. Once things quiet down, Nero takes out a small bottle and starts pouring some liquid over the cuts on his hand to clean them up, smiling while he says it's lucky he had that water of life ready and that he really owes Serena for it. He stands there wondering if he should report the thugs to the guild, but then someone suddenly yells out to him. Nero looks back and sees a guy with spiky hair and a scar standing there, asking if he's the one who handled those thugs. The guy doesn't say anything else for a second, and just gives Nero this really intense, serious stare, leaving Nero standing there totally confused with Swim on his shoulder, not really knowing what to make of the situation. The scarred guy demands an answer and starts walking over, which makes Nero feel uneasy enough to start backing away. Nero watches the scarred man walk closer and asks if he's actually with the thugs he just took down, since he's not about to let anyone touch Swim or take his money without a fight. Nero holds the slime tight, and the man just repeats the bit about money and laying a finger, looking more curious than anything else. He crouches down and asks Nero if it's safe to assume the thugs were the ones threatening him first, so Nero admits that's what happened. The man explains the guild already has wanted posters out for that trio, but there have been rumors that someone has been helping them out from the shadows this whole time. Nero looks at the thug trapped in his water and remembers the spearman saying something about help, which makes the man nod. Nero finally speaks up and asks the guy who he's even talking to right now. The guy gives a bit of a smirk and introduces himself as the Adventurers Guild Master, Sanders Tall. He says most people just call him Master, leaving Nero completely shocked to be standing in front of the boss. The kid introduces himself as Nero, which makes the guild master stop and realize exactly who he's talking to. Sanders asks if he just goes by Nero with no other name, while Nero stands there looking a bit nervous and stares down at the crest on his hand. He explains he used to be an outcast, but since he got exiled from the family, he's officially lost the right to use the name. Nero looks up with a bit of a smile and confirms that yeah, it's just Nero now. Sanders takes it in and says he sees, but honestly the whole family name thing doesn't change anything for him. He tells the group it's time to head out, already starting to walk off while Nero and Swim just try to keep up. Nero follows him, but has to stop and ask where they're even supposed to be going right now. Sanders looks back and tells him it should be pretty obvious. They're heading straight to the Adventurers Guild. Over at the guild, Fleur is busy with some books when she hears them come in and turns around completely caught off guard. She stares at them, wondering why on earth Nero is walking in with the guild master of all people, as Nero just gives a small, awkward smile. Sanders says the timing is perfect and mentions he's going to leave the current situation in someone else's hands. He tells Fleur he's handing over the guys from outside to her, which just leaves her looking completely lost. He goes on to explain how they actually threatened Nero and tried to rob him right there, pointing out they're the ones from the wanted posters. And they even brought their ringleader along. Nero watches while Sanders adds that these guys definitely have a long list of other crimes on their records, and he tells Fleur to make sure she interrogates them whenever she gets the chance. Moving on, Sanders starts heading up the stairs and calls for Nero to come along with him. Just then, a girl with long hair walks through the door and gives a casual greeting. As she enters, Fleur asks if she's looking for the master and tells her he just headed off to a room with that new adventure kid. The girl takes it all in and just says she'll hang around and wait for them to finish up then. The office is quiet as the two of them settle in behind closed doors. Sanders leans over his massive desk and tells Nero he's got a question for him. Nero just looks back and asks what's up. The mood gets serious fast when Sanders asks how exactly Nero managed to take down the owner of a massive magic stone from an agraflesion, showing off the gem right there on the table. Nero doesn't miss a beat and explains that since his crest is for water, he just used that water magic to handle the beasts, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Sanders gives him this intense look, staring him right in the eye before asking if he's actually serious. While a little charm spins on the desk, Nero sticks to his guns and says it's the truth. Water magic is actually great for fighting. Sanders sits back and tells him that a story like that is honestly pretty hard to believe just like that, especially since everyone knows water magic isn't supposed to have any real attack power at all. Nero looks the guild master right in the eyes. He explains that his secret is pretty simple. Water is just really heavy. Sanders stares back in total disbelief, asking if he actually just said water is heavy, and Nero doesn't blink, confirming that's exactly it. The office stays quiet for a second while Sanders starts to chuckle to himself, leaving Nero standing there wondering what's so funny, until the big guy just completely loses it, leaning back in his chair and laughing at the top of his lungs. Sanders puts a hand over his face, still cracking up while he repeats how hilarious it is that Nero's big secret is just heavy water. Nero starts to get a bit annoyed and tells Sanders to cut it out. He's actually being serious about how he fights. The guild master finally starts to cool off, looking at the kid and realizing that he's not joking at all, so he leans in with a sharp, serious look, explaining that even if Nero believes it, nobody can just trust a crazy story like that. He stares Nero down and tells him that if he wants anyone to believe water magic is actually that strong, then he's going to have to step up and prove it with his own strength. Sanders stares Nero down with a wild grin and gives him a direct challenge, telling the kid he wants to fight him. Nero is completely shocked by the sudden offer, standing there with his mouth open while the scene shifts down to the guild's massive underground training ground, where the two of them square up on the wide stone floor. Sanders starts explaining the rules, mentioning that the whole arena is covered in protection magic, but that it won't actually kick in if the damage is just a little bit. So he tells Nero not to worry about dying and to just go all out against him. Sanders gets a real serious look in his eyes and lets Nero know that he carries both the crest of the fist and the crest of lightning, making him what's known as a composite. He bumps his fists together with a cocky look, telling the kid he better keep that in mind before they start. In this world, people who are born with 2 or more crests are called composite attributes, making them way more dangerous than the average person. The narrator explains that people who have both magic and physical fighting attributes are known as hybrids, and they usually have some pretty insane moves that combine both of their crests together. Nero realizes this is actually his first time going up against a hybrid, and he's definitely curious about how the guy fights. But then he stops and thinks for a second, wondering where exactly his own, Sage's crest, fits into all of this. But Sanders cuts through his thoughts to start laying out the ground rules for their match. The deal is simple. The first person who can't keep fighting or gets knocked out of bounds is the loser. Sanders gives Nero a cocky grin and offers him the first move, since the kid looks like a standard magic user. Up in the stands, some guy asks if the guild master's opponent is really just a water mage, and another person whispers that if that's the case, the whole thing is going to be over in a few seconds. The crowd is already writing him off, wondering if there's even a reason to watch such a one-sided fight. Swim the slime bounces into the arena looking happy as ever, which completely catches the crowd off guard. But Nero just smiles and says hello, turning his focus back to the match. He knows the guild master is a beast, but he sees this as his chance to show everyone that water magic isn't weak. Nero shouts that he won't be holding back anymore and kicks things off by firing a massive water jet. Sanders stands his ground as the blast hits, but he's visibly surprised by the power behind it. The water splashes everywhere, and the pure pressure starts sliding Sanders across the floor. It looks like he might actually get pushed out, but he just grunts and swipes his arm, cutting through the water like it's nothing. Nero realizes he was being a little too optimistic, thinking he could just force a ring out that easily, so Sanders starts charging in with lightning sparking around his fist, yelling that the real fight is finally starting. Nero realizes he needs a solid defense and calls out his Water Guardian's shield, creating a massive ball of water just as Sanders charges in with a thunder fist. The electrified punch slams right into the shield, sending bolts of lightning spiderwebbing through the water, which completely catches Nero off guard. He can see his defense is failing, and a second later the whole shield just explodes. Nero gets sent flying back as the water splashes everywhere. He catches himself on the ground, thinking he was actually pretty confident in that shield, but he can't believe it only took one punch to wreck the whole thing. Sanders stands there looking at his own hand, clearly thinking about the impact he just felt, and Nero sees it as his big chance. He thinks Sanders is shaken up, so he jumps back into the offensive. He fires off a water gun spell, sending a bunch of high-speed water bolts flying across the arena. Sanders doesn't slow down for a second, throwing out a crazy barrage of glowing punches. He's got this smug look on his face while he tells Nero not to underestimate him. Nero tries to fire back with his water sphere magic, sending a massive blast of water forward, but Sanders is already focused, lightning crackling all over his arm as he gears up. He screams out his thunderous iron fist, slamming into the water with so much force the whole place lights up. Before Nero can even process what happened, Sanders vanishes and shows up right behind him. Nero panics and starts to call for his Water Guardian shield, but he's way too slow this time. Sanders shouts out his whirlwind thunder kick and catches Nero right in the ribs, sending him flying. Nero is in total shock, barely able to breathe as he realizes he couldn't even see the guy move. He hits the ground hard, looking up at Sanders while his vision starts to fade, and he realizes he's blacking out. Nero feels the pressure as he's pushed back. Thinking he's going to get knocked out of the ring soon, he's sweating and looks completely frustrated, cursing under his breath because things aren't going his way. He yells out that he hasn't even done anything yet. Desperately trying to find a way to turn things around, Sanders stops in his tracks, looking totally caught off guard by what Nero is trying to pull off. Nero manages to latch onto Sanders with a long, thin stream of water, and after sliding across the floor, he catches his breath and says that was way too close. Sanders stares at the water wrap in total shock, asking if this is really just water magic too. Nero tells him he's right, and adds that he's still got plenty of moves left in his bag. Thinking back to his old enemies, Nero realizes that maybe he's been holding back this whole time, mostly because the people he's facing now are nothing like the guys who used to target him before. Nero realizes that if he doesn't go all out, his water magic will never get the respect it deserves. Nothing's changed yet, so he charges up a sphere of water magic and shouts that he's done hesitating. Sanders grunts, feeling the pressure shift as he watches the kid's energy spike. He mentions how the look in Nero's eyes is completely different now, and seeing that, Sanders drops into a low stance, surrounding himself with massive bolts of electricity to unleash his Thunder Tiger Fierce Assault, sending a giant beast made of lightning screaming forward. The tiger lunges across the gap, while Nero preps his counter right at the last second. He calls out his heavy water bullet, focusing all that weight into a single point, and smacks the lightning tiger right in the face with the pressurized orb, causing the whole arena to erupt in a massive explosion of water and sparks. The pressurized water orb slams right into the lightning tiger's face, causing a massive blast that sends sparks flying everywhere as Sanders yells out, feeling the full force of the collision hitting him. The arena floor just explodes into a cloud of dust and flying rocks while Nero stays back, watching the destruction settle. Up in the stands, the other adventurers are just sitting there with their mouths open, completely shocked by the power they just saw. Right then, Swim jumps into the air, chirping happily, and Nero catches the little guy, laughing as he calls out his name while the slime nuzzles against him. The crowd starts losing it, with guys yelling about how they can't believe the kid actually beat the master. Everyone's whispering, asking if this is really the same guy who's only supposed to have water magic. They're all in total disbelief that someone could take down a guy like Sanders using nothing but water. leaving the guild master to just throw his hand up and admit that he totally lost the fight. Sanders sits against the rubble, looking pretty exhausted after the blast. To the side, Nero tells him he wants to hear more about how it felt, since Sanders admits he never thought he'd actually get taken down like that. He just stares at Nero, wondering what the hell that water magic even was, while he cracks his neck, saying that even with his protection magic active, anyone but him would probably be dead right now. Hearing that, Nero gets all flustered and starts apologizing for overdoing it, but Sanders just waves it off, telling the kid it was just a match, so there's really no reason for him to be sorry about winning. Sanders laughs and tosses a bottle, mentioning he actually ended up using the recovery potion on himself that he'd originally brought for Nero, which makes Nero look up with these big hopeful eyes. He asks if this means he actually passed the test for his magic, and Sanders just gives him a solid look and says yeah. He knows Nero's the real deal, especially since the master realized his fate was sealed from the very first spell Nero threw out there, thinking to himself that even though it's crazy, that kid's water magic totally defies everything people think they know. Sanders asks Nero what his current adventure rank is, and the kid tells him he's just a rank E, so Sanders decides right then and there to bump him up to rank D, which completely blows Nero's mind. Nero can't believe it and asks if the master is actually sure about the promotion, but Sanders doesn't hesitate at all, telling the kid he's definitely earned the new rank. The master points out that after repelling a magic beast and winning their fight, there's no doubt, even though Nero's still being humble, saying he doesn't think Sanders was even going all out during the match. Sanders tells him not to be stupid since he was totally playing for keeps back there, but then he grins and mentions a match is still a bit different than a real fight to the death. The master finishes by saying Nero's strength and water magic are definitely the real deal, which is a huge relief. But as Nero starts talking about his water being heavy, Sanders suddenly reaches out and tells him to wait. Sanders looks Nero right in the eye and tells him he gets how strong the kid is, but he needs to keep that power a secret for now. Nero asks why he'd need to hide it, but before he can get an answer, a girl's voice from behind calls out that he's amazing. Nero freezes up with a look of total confusion as he tries to figure out who just showed up. A girl with long hair and a confident smile just walks right up to them like it's nothing. Sanders turns his head and asks the girl, Exiled, if she was actually watching their fight this whole time, and she admits she was, saying she's shocked a kid finally managed to take down the big man himself. Nero's jaw just about hits the floor as the situation starts to get even weirder for him. He can barely get the words out, asking Sanders if this girl really just called him dad. Sanders puts a hand on her shoulder and officially introduces Exiled as his daughter, who's also an adventurer, leaving Exiled to give him a big, bright smile and tell him it's nice to meet him. Nero stands there completely stunned, barely able to get a single word out as he tries to process what's happening. Sanders notices him staring and asks what he's looking at with a terrifying look, making Nero panic and insist it's nothing. The big guy doesn't let up though, warning Nero that even if she looks nice, his daughter has a nasty temper. He tells the kid that if he tries anything funny, she'll absolutely crush him, which just makes Exiled laugh and tell her dad to knock it off. She gives Nero a bright smile and a wink, telling him not to worry because she isn't scary like her father says. Then Exiled leans in close, getting right in his personal space, and saying there's something much more important, leaving Nero flustered and stammering as he tries to figure out what she's about to do next. Exiled just stands there for a second, looking at him with a warm smile. She finally speaks up, telling him that after seeing what he can do, he's really caught her interest, and then she just drops a bombshell, asking Nero if he wants to go on a date with her once they're finished. Nero stands there with his jaw on the floor, yelling out in total shock as he tries to process the word date. Exiled just gives him a smug, happy smile, but the mood shifts instantly when Sanders chimes in with a low, scary voice, saying he finally sees what's happening. The big guy looks absolutely furious in the background, telling Nero that the two of them need to have a very serious talk, one that has nothing to do with guild business. Sanders orders the kid to follow him to his room immediately, leaving a terrified Nero with no choice but to stammer out a yes and follow along. They head upstairs and walk down a quiet hallway toward the private rooms. Once they're inside, Exiled completely ignores her dad's temper and starts poking the slime, asking if the little guy actually has a name. While Sanders sits at his desk looking like he's about to lose it, Nero awkwardly tells her that the slime's name is Swim. Exiled giggles and says it's nice to meet him while Swim makes a happy little noise. But Sanders is in the corner literally shaking with rage until he finally snaps and yells at his daughter, demanding to know why she thought she could just barge into his room too. Exiled doesn't even blink, just telling her dad that she obviously wants to spend some time getting to know her date better. Sanders looks like he's about to explode, asking his daughter if she's actually being serious right now. While a tiny Exiled just ignores the mood and calls out to Nero, she tilts her head with a totally innocent look, asking if she wasn't supposed to follow them back to the room. Nero is completely flustered, stammering that he doesn't really mind her being there. But the situation is still pretty awkward. Eclair just laughs it off and says that means there isn't a problem, while her dad sits there behind his desk looking like a literal demon. Nero is sweating bullets because he can feel the guild master's glare getting scarier by the second. But then, Sanders finally lets out a huge sigh and gives in, saying it's fine since she already saw the fight with Nero anyway. He decides he might as well fill her in on what they were talking about, so Nero and Eclair settle in to listen. Sanders leans forward and asks Nero to confirm what he said earlier about water being heavy, and the kid just nods and says yeah. Eclair nearly loses it, yelling out in total shock because she can't wrap her head around the idea of water having weight. She goes quiet for a second and puts a finger to her chin, thinking back to the crazy fight she just saw between Nero and her dad. Nero looks over at Eclair and wonders if she's just totally lost in thought, while she stands there with a finger to her chin, clearly deep in her own head. Sanders calls out Nero's name and tells the kid that he might be taking this whole situation a bit too lightly. He explains that until this moment, everyone just accepted as common knowledge that water doesn't actually have any weight. Nero admits that he used to see things the same way as everyone else, just perceiving water as weightless until now. But then he says everything changed once he finally realized just how heavy the water actually is. He explains that the resistance he felt wasn't some spirit trick, but the literal power of the water itself. Sanders listens and wonders out loud if maybe the water spirits are just playing some kind of prank on them, but Eclair chimes in, asking if there's a chance the water spirits are actually working together with Nero instead. Sanders shuts that idea down fast, saying that wouldn't happen with just a basic water crest like the one Nero has because actual spirit users are a completely different matter entirely, leaving the group to figure out what's really going on. Nero realizes that Sanders is right, thinking to himself about how the sage's crest he recently received must be the reason for his new perspective. Sanders explains that for as long as anyone can remember, people just assumed any weird or powerful things water did were just the work of spirits, noting that this idea is actually a core teaching of the church, making it the only truth the public has ever known. The guild master points out the massive problem here. Nero's discovery about water having weight and power basically proves the world's common sense is a lie. Sanders tells Nero that's exactly why he needs to keep his mouth shut, since challenging the church's teachings would lead to a world of trouble. Nero quickly agrees, and Sanders makes sure to tell Eclair she's under the same gag order. While she agrees, Nero grips his hand, feeling the seriousness of the situation. Nero looks a bit worried, telling the old man he's definitely not looking to start any fights or cause unnecessary drama. He starts thinking about how common water is back home, picturing himself standing by the town well realizing that he spent his whole life around it without ever actually noticing the weight behind it. And even back then at that old well, he was completely blind to the true power hidden within the water he used every day. Nero stands there thinking about everything, realizing it feels like he was brainwashed into believing water was weak. Sanders snaps him out of it, pointing out that even if the world is wrong, Nero's magic is still way too powerful. He looks Nero right in the eye and asks if he's absolutely sure the water crest was the only thing he got. Nero starts getting a little sweaty and hesitates, while Eclair looks over wondering what else it could possibly be. Nero admits he's just as confused as they are, but decides it's time to come clean about a new development, showing them his right hand, where that mysterious second crest suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Eclair grabs his hand to get a better look, but she's completely lost since she can't see a single thing on his skin. Seeing her reaction, Nero realizes that for some reason, he's the only one who can actually see the mark, and Sanders can't believe what he's hearing, asking for confirmation that this thing is totally invisible to everyone else. The guild master suddenly loses his cool, yelling at Nero to tell him if this hidden mark is a black crest. Nero quickly clears things up, telling Sanders the mark isn't a black crest, but is actually a pale blue color. Sanders sounds pretty surprised that it's not black, while Eclair just nods and confirms it for him. Nero holds his hand out and explains that the mark actually has a name. Turns out it's called the Sage's Crest. Sanders admits he's never even heard of a crest like that before, and Eclair says she's in the same boat, since Nero starts thinking to himself how rare this thing must be if even the guild master is totally clueless about it. Sanders leans in and asks what exactly happened to make a legendary-sounding mark like that just show up. Nero isn't 100% sure, but he tells them it seems to be because he finally mastered the logic of water. Sanders takes a second to process that, nodding along like he's starting to see the bigger picture. Eclair jumps in, all curious, asking Nero if he's noticed any big changes or new powers since the mark appeared. Nero looks at his hand and starts wondering if his water magic has actually leveled up since getting the crest. Nero keeps the explanation going, saying that ever since getting the mark, it feels way easier to invent new spells. Sanders thinks back to the fight from earlier, remembering how Nero was already throwing out all kinds of magic he'd never seen. Sanders asks if he's got even more hidden gems up his sleeve, and Nero just nods, telling him that's exactly right. Nero holds up 2 fingers to show how limited he used to be, explaining that before the crest showed up, he only had 2 spells to his name. But things changed fast, because since the mark appeared, he's already managed to come up with about 10 more spells. Sanders and Eclair both jump out of their seats, screaming the number 10 like they can't believe what they're hearing. Sanders gets right in his face, looking dead serious, as he asks how much time it actually took to learn all that. Nero gets a little bit awkward and admits, it's really only been over the last few days that everything started clicking. Eclair is totally blown away, saying it's incredible since she's supposed to be a fast learner. Yet it took her a full month just for one flash of insight, and then another 3 months after that just to turn that idea into actual magic. Sanders scratches his head, looking totally floored by Nero's progress, saying most mages stop after a couple spells, so hitting 4 is already elite, and Nero just blew way past that. Sanders switches gears and tells Nero that instead of D rank, he needs to take the C rank exam, which leaves Nero and Swim standing there completely stunned by the sudden jump. Eclair jumps in and starts laughing, telling Nero she's actually up for the same recommendation herself. She keeps the energy high, mentioning how if they both get recommended, they might end up taking the whole exam together. Nero asks if a jump like that is even allowed, but Sanders just gives him a serious look and says he's just rating him based on what he can actually do. Sanders wraps things up by telling him not to forget their talk, and while Nero nods along, Eclair is already getting ready to move. She turns around and tells Nero that now that her dad is finally done with the boring talk, it's her turn, and so she leans in with a huge blushing smile, telling Nero that the next time they hang out, it's officially a date. She grabs Nero's hand and starts dragging him toward the door while he stammers, which makes Sanders absolutely lose it, screaming that he's not letting any dates happen. Eclair just brushes him off, saying it's fine since they're technically just going to a dungeon together, leaving her dad looking like his soul just left his body. Sanders is losing his mind, yelling about how his daughter is way too touchy before the word dungeon finally sinks in, leaving him screaming from behind his desk that a dungeon crawl definitely doesn't count as a date, while Nero just looks on totally confused. Eclair just gives a playful reply that he can think whatever he wants, ignoring her dad's meltdown as she leads Nero and Swim away. As they walk down the hallway, Nero finally speaks up and asks her why she's choosing him for this, especially since she just turns around with a wink and a peace sign, telling him he's her absolute ideal, which leaves the kid and the slime stunned. Nero tries to be realistic and points out that he only uses water magic, thinking that might change her mind. Eclair just laughs and tells him that's the exact reason why he's perfect, and before he can say anything else, she reaches out and grabs both of his hands, looking him in the eye and asking him to officially form a party with her. Nero stands there near the door, repeating the question like he can't believe a high ranker actually wants to team up with him. She just smiles and says that since they're heading in to conquer the place together, being in a party is the only way to go. Nero starts to hesitate, thinking back to how Guy and the others treated him like trash for his magic, but Eclair cuts right through his doubts, looking him in the eye and asking for a real chance to show him what she's got. Nero's heart skips a beat as he stares back at her. He blushes pretty hard and finally gives in, telling her that he understands and he's down to team up. Eclair is basically glowing, cheering about how happy she is and saying they're going to kill it together, which makes Nero reply that the pleasure is all his. He's actually honored a high ranker like her even asked him. She doesn't waste any time and says they need to go get their official exploration permit right away. So she leads him over to the counter and calls out to Fleur, asking her to get them registered as a temporary party. Fleur gives a warm smile, telling the two of them how glad she is that Eclair finally found a partner for her travels. She puts a hand over her heart and adds that knowing Eclair is the one in charge makes her feel totally at ease. Eclair sets things straight by telling everyone she's the one relying on Nero, especially after seeing how incredible his match was with her dad, so Fleur completely loses it and asks if Nero really went up against the guild master himself. Eclair keeps bragging, pointing out that Nero didn't just fight him but actually won, leaving Fleur shouting in total disbelief. Fleur admits she was honestly pretty worried when Nero decided to start adventuring solo, but it's clear now that he's been putting in the work. She gives him a serious look and warns him not to let the wind go to his head or make any huge mistakes, which Nero just takes in stride. He gives her a big smile and thanks her for looking out for him. Fleur laughs it off and tells him he's basically like a little brother to her, so she can't really help but worry about him, and Nero just stands there for a second, repeating the little brother thing to himself as he processes it. Moving things along, Fleur asks the group how they're planning on traveling to their next spot, while Nero keeps watching her, thinking to himself that having an older sister like Fleur might have actually been a pretty good deal. Fleur points out a specific spot in the guidebook, telling Nero and Eclair that this dungeon seems like a perfect match for their skill level, so she asks Nero if he's actually spent much time raiding dungeons before. Nero scratches his head and mentions he did some back when he was still in Guy's party, though he claims he wasn't much help to them back then, and Eclair speaks up, asking if he's talking about the famous guy who has the hero's crest. Nero tells her they were a team for about a year, but goes on to say that he isn't part of that group anymore. He looks a little bit nervous while asking Eclair if she feels disappointed knowing he's not with those big-shot adventurers anymore, but Eclair just looks at him with total confusion and asks why she would ever feel like that. She gives him a huge smile and says she's actually happy about it, since if he hadn't left them she wouldn't have been able to team up with him herself. She catches herself though, wondering if saying she's glad about him being gone from his old party sounds a little insensitive, yet she can't help but let out a satisfied smile, clearly happy with how things worked out. Nero gives Eclair a big smile and thanks her, saying her kind words really put his mind at ease. Fleur joins in with a blush, admitting she's not totally sure what's going on, but she's just glad Nero is happy. She watches him with a doting look, thinking about how fresh and innocent he is compared to most adventurers. Fleur lets out a heavy sigh and wishes she were younger, but Nero quickly tells her she's still plenty young. Eclair starts to mention Fleur's actual age, but Fleur immediately shuts her up by covering her mouth while laughing along. With the paperwork in hand, Fleur keeps Eclair quiet and announces that the dungeon raid and party registration are officially finished, though she gets serious for a second, warning them that since this dungeon is still unconquered, they better not be reckless. She tells them to turn around and come back immediately if the boss looks too tough, and the two of them just cheer in response. The sun starts setting over the guild building as they finally wrap things up for the day. Eclair suggests meeting up at the fountain tomorrow morning at 6, and Nero waves goodbye, ready for their new start. Nero realizes he's low on holy water and decides he needs to visit the church to ask the priest for a refill. He walks past a window, thinking about what else he needs for the crawl, totally unaware that Hilton is watching him. Hilton stands up from his table, his chair scraping against the floor as he realizes Nero and Eclair are heading to a dungeon. He touches his chin with a smirk, thinking about how he just stumbled onto some really useful information. He grabs his cane and steps out into a quiet alleyway to follow them, but things don't go as planned. A random thug shows up out of nowhere, getting right in Hilton's face and telling him to step aside and stay quiet. The guy presses a dagger into Hilton's back to keep him in line, and Hilton just calmly tells him he understands, letting the thug lead him deeper into the shadows of the alleyway without putting up any kind of fight. The thug laughs, saying the robe doesn't hide those fancy clothes underneath, and asking Hilton just how much cash he's carrying. The guy starts to tell him to hand it over if he values his life, but Hilton suddenly spins around with his cloak flaring out. The thug gets caught in a sudden flash of light and looks completely panicked, falling to his knees and coughing while Hilton stands over him. Hilton asks if the guy really thought he could do anything with just a small knife, making it clear the guy totally underestimated him. He pins the thug's head to the ground as the guy groans, struggling to move while Hilton holds the blade to his neck. He calmly points out that it would be incredibly easy to just slit his throat right there on the spot. The thug starts panicking and begs for forgiveness, admitting he never expected Hilton to be this strong. Hilton isn't interested in the apology and asks if the guy has any other partners. The guy nervously says yes, so Hilton presses the knife closer and tells him to start talking fast if he doesn't want to die. The guy stammers that there are tons of people like him and that all the local criminals are usually working together. Hilton just gives a small, interested smirk as he listens to the guy ramble. He pulls the thug's hair back roughly and says he sees what's going on. The guy is just desperate for some money. Hilton leans in with a cold smile, offering the thug a deal to do a little job for him if he wants to keep his life. The scene shifts to a quiet mountain trail winding through thick trees and white rocky cliffs, where Eclair is leading the way. She warns Nero that beast-type monsters are known to show up in these mountains, so they need to stay sharp while she starts thinking back to a conversation they had. She remembers Nero telling her to let him know if her dad ever does anything weird, but she just laughs the idea off. She calls Nero a total worrywart and says there's no way her father would ever do anything like that. Nero isn't so sure. He knows that even a small misunderstanding could end up turning into something pretty terrible, especially with Sanders looking so terrifying in his mind. He tells himself he has to be extra careful around the guy, but then he and Swim both freeze. They feel something watching them from the shadows of the forest, and suddenly a pack of wolves comes growling out from behind the trees, surrounding the two of them on the path. Nero looks surprised by the sudden ambush, but Eclair doesn't hesitate. She tells him to stand back and leave this fight to her. Nero tries to stop her, yelling that it's way too dangerous for her to go in alone, But Eclair isn't listening at all and starts calling out her martial arts skill while she slams her weapon down with a thunderstrike hammer, sending the wolf flying with a massive bolt of electricity. Nero and Swim can't even move. They just stand there with their mouths open, totally stunned by how easily she handled it, leaving the rest of the pack to run for their lives into the forest. Eclair turns back with a huge grin and a peace sign, asking him what he thinks of her hammer and lightning combo. So Nero tells her he's honestly pretty blown away by how strong she actually is. He follows behind her, thinking about how dual crest holders are seriously in a league of their own, and Eclair just laughs it off, saying she's just happy she got a chance to show off a little bit. But then she gets this confident look and mentions she's figured out a way to make her power even crazier. Nero is totally hyped, asking how she pulled off that crazy move, and Eclair just gives a smug little laugh while winking at him. She says she's going to save the explanation for later, keeping the two of them moving toward a massive rock formation with a dark opening tucked away in the side. Eclair points out the entrance, telling him they've finally arrived right at the spot where the adventure begins. Standing at the mouth of the cave, Eclair admits she's actually starting to feel a bit of the pressure now that they're actually here, but Nero just laughs it off. He tells her that going into a dungeon for the first time is always the best part. So as they step inside, he starts thinking about how these dungeons just pop up every now and then, and how they eventually vanish once they've been cleared out or hit their limit. He looks around the damp cave walls, noting that since this place is still pretty new, nobody really knows what's waiting inside yet, leaving Eclair to lead the way. She mentions this floor is just a straight path, so it shouldn't be much of a problem for them to handle. Nero warns Eclair that if she's going to walk, she needs to stay close to the walls, but he's a second too late as the floor tile under her foot clicks, triggering a sharp metal spike to shoot out from the wall, and Nero sees it coming, yelling for her to look out as he lunges forward, tackling Eclair to the ground just in time for the projectile to whistle over their heads, catching her completely off guard. Nero lets out a breath and says how close that was, looking back at the trap stuck deep in the cave wall behind them. He looks down at Eclair to make sure she's holding up okay after the sudden hit, and Nero starts apologizing like crazy for jumping on her, but Eclair just blushes and says it's fine since he saved her life. She smiles and gives him a real thank you, admitting she would have been badly hurt if he hadn't been there to move her, making Nero turn away all embarrassed. He stammers a bit, telling her that she has a habit of running straight into traps when she walks normally, so they really need to keep sticking to the walls from now on. Nero stares at the wall where the last trap came from. He mentions that he's actually pretty worried about the other side of the tunnel too. And suddenly more crystal spikes fly out from the rock. Eclair barely has time to yell as they whistle right past her head. Once the dust settles, Eclair looks at the trap stuck in the ground. She's impressed and asks Nero if he's some kind of dungeon expert, but Nero just gives her a modest smile. He explains that he actually learned a ton of these survival tricks from the people in his old party. He thinks back to Guy, remembering how good the leader was at spotting traps because, as Fia Serena used to joke, Guy had the kind of twisted mind that helped him think like a villain, and Nero can still practically hear Guy's annoyed voice repeating those old excuses whenever the party brought it up back in the day. Shaking off the memories, Nero tells Eclair they need to keep moving forward but to be extra careful. They start walking deeper into the cave until three giant rats wearing armor and holding weapons block the path ahead. Nero recognizes them as rat soldiers. Eclair points out that these are officially the first real monsters they've encountered in this dungeon. So Nero steps out in front of her. He tells Eclair to stay back and let him handle this fight on his own. Nero holds his magic stone tight and gets ready to use his water magic, shouting out his water spear barrage skill, as a bunch of liquid blades fly forward and pin the rat soldiers down. Nero starts walking again like it was nothing. He says the first floor monsters don't even look that tough, but Eclair tells him to hold on. She's losing it because he just ended the fight in one shot. Nero just stands there looking confused. He asks if he did something wrong, but Eclair yells back that that's totally not what she meant. She explains she has something she wants to try out, so she asks him to just splash the next enemies with water instead of taking them out. Nero's cool with that and tells her he'll just use a splash next time. He agrees to the plan as Eclair says they should keep going after they grab the loot. Even Swim seems to be on board with the idea. Just then Nero stops in his tracks. He feels something weird nearby. He whips his head around to check their back. Eclair sees him get serious and asks what's up. Nero thinks to himself about that weird feeling he had. He really thought someone was watching him, but he didn't see any other adventurers on the way in. It doesn't make much sense, so Nero figures he's probably just a bit on edge from being deep in the dungeon with monsters everywhere. He brushes it off with a smile, telling himself it was definitely just his imagination playing tricks. Nero asks Eclair if she can handle the materials from the rats they just beat, but then he notices Swim is already on it, vacuuming up every single piece of loot while Eclair just stands there totally shocked. They find a chest a bit later and Eclair gets super excited for treasure. Nero pulls out a bottle and says it's just an antidote. As they keep moving, Nero mentions they're making great time, especially with the extra chests they're finding. He looks over at the little slime and thinks about how her storage capacity is actually insane. And Nero smiles, thinking Swim is smart, cute, and the perfect companion, while the slime just makes a happy little sound. Eclair mentions they've mostly been dealing with traps so far. She really wonders what they're going to run into next, as the two of them walk into a massive cave chamber filled with giant frogs just sitting around the pillars, and the monsters start croaking loudly, the whole room filling up with the sound of them ribbiting. Eclair looks at the frogs and tells Nero it's finally their turn to fight. Then she asks him to help her out with some water magic. Nero tells her he's got it, and with Eclair looking totally hyped for the fight, he calls out his water splash magic, sending a huge wave across the rocky floor and soaking all the monsters. Nero asks if that's enough water for her, and Eclair tells him he did a perfect job and to just watch how she handles this. She raises a giant hammer over her head as it starts sparking with lightning, calling out her thunderclad hammer move while getting a huge grin on her face, shouting that she's going in as she slams the weapon down with everything she's got, sending a massive shock through the water on the floor. Nero is completely confused and asks Eclair if she's just attacking thin air, but Eclair slams the floor and the electric shockwaves rip through the water, fried frogs everywhere. Eclair is hyped and yells that she did it, saying lightning is super effective against water. Nero just stands there totally speechless at how fast that ended. Nero asks her what she means by that, looking down at all the dead frogs floating in the puddles. Eclair explains that her electricity traveled through the water he made to shock all of them at once. Nero starts to realize something about lightning passing through water. He has a sudden realization and remembers his fight with the guild master and how his water shield disappeared in a single hit. Eclair smiles at him and says exactly, confirming his theory. She tells him she was already curious about this back when he used his martial arts in the marsh, but seeing his match with her dad made her 100% certain about how it works. Nero's head is spinning as he thinks about how lightning moves through water, and it starts to click that this might be the only reason Eclair wanted him around, so he asks if that's why she invited him. Eclair doesn't even try to hide it, happily confirming that it's because he's a water magic user. She explains that she figured having a partner with a water crest would actually make her lightning way more useful. Nero just looks at her and says he gets it now, but Eclair starts getting worked up, thinking Nero believes he's some kind of charity case since people usually think water items are trash. She gets right in his face and asks if he really thinks she'd just team up with any random water user. And before Nero can even try to explain himself, she reaches out and starts squishing his cheeks together. She yells that she knew he was thinking something like that and keeps pulling at his face to mess with him. But then she stops and gets really serious, telling him the only reason she felt okay asking for help was because it was him. Nero stays quiet while Eclair keeps her hands on his face, looking him right in the eyes because she wants him to know that seeing him use his water magic to fight her dad really had an impact on her. She goes on about how she saw he had the guts to never quit when things got intense in a fight, and reminds him that he's actually been the one looking out for her the entire time they've been in the dungeon. Spending this time together made her realize he's someone she can actually trust, so even though she originally planned to wait until they were done with the dungeon to have this talk, she can't hold it back. Eclair reaches out her hand with a huge smile and asks Nero if he'd be down to form an official party with her. Nero looks at her and gives a small smile, simply thanking her for saying all of that. He tells her he's sorry for being such a downer before. It turns out he was just overthinking things, but now he and Swim are both beaming, and he tells Eclair he's just really happy she actually appreciates him. The two of them seal the deal with a handshake, and Eclair tells Nero she's looking forward to working with him. She tells him he needs to start having some actual confidence in himself because he really is amazing, but then Eclair suddenly stops mid-sentence and looks completely shocked by something she just noticed. Nero asks if something is wrong, but she just grabs his hand and yells that she can finally see it. She points right at his hand, shouting about the special crest he was telling her about earlier. Nero is losing it and asks if she can actually see the mark, and she just laughs and says it's perfectly clear now. Out of nowhere, Nero starts apologizing while looking all flustered because he can't stop thinking about how scary her dad is, so Eclair just stares at him and tells him to quit saying sorry. If he's happy about this, he should be celebrating instead. Nero asks Swim if he agrees while the little slime bounces around happily, though he admits he's still shocked she can see it. Eclair starts thinking it over, wondering why his hidden crest would just show up out of the blue like that. Eclair starts thinking there has to be some kind of reason for this, just like when she first got her own sage's crest, right as a strange voice speaks about blessings for the one who finally figured out the principles of water. Nero thinks back to their earlier fight, wondering if this all started when their lightning and water magic hit at the same time, realizing Eclair must have caught onto something and used his magic as a way to check the results. He explains that hitting that power level might be why he can see things now, and Eclair just listens while trying to wrap her head around it. She gets hyped up and says their teamwork is going to be on another level now, which Nero and Swim totally agree with. Eclair points ahead and says they should get back to the dungeon. But they don't get very far because they both freeze when they hear someone nearby crying out for help. Nero asks if it could be other adventurers in the area, and Eclair realizes something bad is definitely going down. The two of them take off through the rocky tunnel, shouting for each other to move fast. A sudden flash of light cuts right through the dark tunnel. As they round the corner, Eclair and Nero stop dead in their tracks, looking completely shocked at the scene waiting for them. Further down the path, a massive beast is standing over two adventurers. One of the guys is flat on his back, clearly out of the fight. The monster lets out a nasty growl, saliva dripping from its fangs while it gets ready to finish them off. Nero recognizes the creature immediately and asks if that's really a red bear, unable to believe his eyes since Eclair points out that this is supposed to be a low-level dungeon. So a magic beast like that has no business being here. Nero thinks back to the massive plant beast they fought in the forest recently, realizing that these high-threat creatures are showing up way more often than they should be. And things are getting dangerous. The standing adventurer spots them and screams for help, explaining that the beast has gone into a total frenzy after seeing his friend get hurt. Nero tells Eclair they need to help right now, but she just stands there with a heavy look on her face, not saying a word. Nero calls out Eclair's name to snap her out of her daze, and she jumps a bit, clearly caught off guard as she apologizes and admits the whole situation feels really wrong. While even Swim thinks things are looking pretty weird, suddenly, a loud scream echoes through the tunnel, making Nero's heart race as he looks over and sees the red bear standing over the adventurer, who's completely terrified and begging anyone to help him out. Nero doesn't even hesitate and charges forward, telling the guy to watch out, ignoring Eclair as she yells for him to wait. But he already has his wand out. Water starts gathering at the tip as he gets ready to blast the beast. A massive wave of water hits the red bear right in the face, stopping it in its tracks and leaving it totally dazed, while Nero looks back and tells Eclair that he's soaked the monster, which should make her physical attacks way more effective. Eclair finally gets her head back in the fight, gripping her massive hammer and telling him she's got this, and with a huge battle cry, she swings her weapon down with everything she's got to crush the beast. Nero sees the plan is working and cheers, noticing how much his water magic is helping Eclair land her hits, but then Swim suddenly makes a loud noise and jumps through the air at high speed. Nero is completely caught off guard as he sees a hand with a tattoo suddenly try to sink a knife right into the slime. He quickly grabs Swim and screams its name. Panicked because the guy from the trio is standing right there with a weapon drawn, the guy looks absolutely furious and snaps that a pathetic slime shouldn't be getting in his way. Nero can't believe what's happening, while the mohawked guy from the group yells at his friend for failing the sneak attack. Swim makes a little squeak as Nero holds it tight, still worried the little guy might be hurt. It turns out that slimes are actually resistant to blades, and the knife just slid right off its body like it was nothing. Eclair sees the commotion and rushes back over, yelling out to ask if Nero is okay. The armored guy warns his friends that Eclair looks like trouble, but the blonde leader just acts cool and says they'll be fine. Eclair tries to draw the beast's attention by yelling at Red to look her way, but a sudden flash of light goes off right above the bear's head, making its eyes glow. The beast lets out a massive roar that shakes the ground as it goes completely wild. Eclair's expression shifts to pure surprise as she realizes something has changed. The bear charges with insane speed, and she can't believe how much stronger and faster it's gotten. The blonde leader of the trio just stands there looking smug, bragging that Red is 3 times stronger now, and even a lightning user like Eclair won't be able to win, which makes Nero realize the beast was in on it. Nero tries to rush over to help her, but the blonde guy steps right in his way and says he isn't going anywhere. Looking back at the beast, Nero starts putting the pieces together. It was definitely weird that it stopped attacking. He thinks about how Eclair sensed something was off from the start, but he just didn't see it coming. The spearman from the trio mocks Nero, telling him he should probably worry about himself instead of focusing on the girl, as he laughs, saying that worrying won't do him any good anyway, while Nero stands there with Swim looking completely fed up. Nero stares the guy down and asks if they even consider themselves real adventurers. The spearman just smirks while holding his gear, telling Nero there's no point in answering because he's going to die right there. But Nero clarifies that he only asked because he wanted to know if they felt any shame, seeing as they're hiding behind a monster, which makes him wonder if they even count as adventurers at all. Another thug in a helmet steps forward with a huge axe, bragging that Nero's head is worth 1,000,000 marin, and this will be easy shouting for him to die as he swings the heavy blade straight at Nero's head. Nero doesn't even flinch, simply starting up his water magic as the axe comes crashing down, calling out his water guardian's shield, which creates a solid barrier that stops the thug's attack dead in its tracks. The thug with the axe can't believe his eyes as his weapon gets stuck in the water barrier. He screams, asking what the hell is going on as Nero stays calm, focusing his energy to form small, pressurized bubbles of water around his fingertips. He calls out his water gun spell and lets it rip, firing a burst of high-speed shots right into the guy's chest. The impact is massive, shattering the thug's heavy armor and sending him stumbling back until the blast carries through, slamming into the stone wall behind him with enough force to leave a crater. It's over for that guy, and he just slumps against the wall completely defeated while the others watch from a distance. The leader starts losing it, stuttering about how Nero was supposed to be some low-level trash with a weak attribute. His partner yells back that he doesn't have any answers and tells the leader to just shut up and do something. So the blonde guy tries to take control of the situation by launching a bunch of daggers straight at Nero, and the leader follows up immediately, calling out a special move as he tosses 3 more blades into the mix. Nero stands his ground with Swim on his shoulder, letting his water magic swirl around him like a shield. He sends a high-pressure water whip straight into the mage girl's face, knocking her out cold. With the others down, Nero points at the blonde leader and tells him he's the only one left, while he notices the guy doesn't actually seem that skilled at fighting with a whip. Nero starts piecing it together. Since the guy was controlling a beast earlier, he definitely has a tamer's crest, but the leader just smirks and grips his weapon tighter, showing off a strange bracelet on his wrist. Suddenly the guy yells to activate his skill, and a bright light flashes from the jewel in his gear. The whip instantly bursts into flames, turning into a lethal fire weapon as he swings it around. Nero is caught off guard, wondering if it's some kind of rare composite attribute or if it's just the bracelet. He asks if that's a skill jewel and the leader just laughs, telling him he's pretty quick to catch on. Skill jewels are these super rare gemstones found only in dungeons, and once you set them into gear made from special stuff like mithril, they let you use crazy unique effects. The leader calls out his flaming whip skill and swings a massive fire strike down, but Nero stays calm and starts gathering water at the end of his staff, letting out a huge splash that kills the fire. The guy just stands there holding a soaked whip, looking totally confused. He completely loses it and yells out, asking how any of this is happening while he tries to process it. He knows water beats fire, but this felt way too easy. He keeps muttering that none of this should be possible, because everyone says the water attribute is totally useless magic, but Nero just stares him down. People usually think water beats fire since it can put out flames, but the logic of this world says water magic is totally useless in a fight, and that mindset sticks. Even Nero used to think his magic was weak before his sage crest showed up, realizing that if he was still his old self, he never would have stopped that fire whip. Nero stands there with Swim, wondering why water isn't respected as a combat tool, feeling like the world is just flat out rejecting how strong water can actually be. The leader stares at his soaked whip, confused by the magic, while Nero decides it's not worth explaining. He calls out his water hammer skill and drops a massive pillar of water, crushing everything in the way. Nero yells out for Eclair as she prepares to face down the red bear, leaving the massive beast looking around, completely confused about what just happened. Eclair's eyes go wide as she realizes the opening she's been waiting for is right there. She leaps high into the air, calling out a martial arts skill as she brings her weapon down with everything she's got. She yells Mjolnir as a massive strike connects with the red bear's head, completely rattling the beast and leaving it totally out of it with its tongue hanging out. Eclair catches her breath and asks Nero if he's all finished up on his end too, mentioned how his magic is seriously impressive. Nero looks at the bear wondering if those thugs had a tamer's crest, but thinks Eclair winning solo is the real highlight here. He figures the bear probably slowed down once he knocked the leader unconscious, breaking the control. Eclair just smiles and says the victory belongs to him, but Nero just acts humble about it, thinking about how she was the one who actually noticed the danger first. Eclair admits that the whole thing turned into a huge mess, explaining that her final move took way too much time to charge up while that bear was pressuring her. So she's really glad Nero was there to help out. Standing over the fallen leader, she starts wondering why those guys would even try to jump them in a place like this. Nero suddenly remembers them mentioning a 1,000,000 Marin bounty for taking him out. It's weird though because those guys were carrying expensive gear while acting like they were broke. Eclair just shakes her head, saying adventurers who betray their own for cash are the worst, and suggests they just tie them up and leave them there. Nero gets worried about the monsters in the area, but Eclair isn't having it. She tells him they can't just drag 3 grown men out of a dungeon, especially since they're the ones who started this. Eclair is right in the middle of telling Nero to hurry up and tie the guys up, when a voice from the dark cave entrance stops her. Saying there's no need for that anymore, Nero senses the danger immediately and yells for Eclair to watch out, but she's just standing there totally confused before she can even move. A blade flashes through the air and finishes off the leader of the trio right in front of them, leaving both Nero and Eclair completely stunned, as the archer gets taken out just as fast, blood dripping everywhere while he slumped against the rocks. The female mage is also dead on the floor, making it clear that someone is cleaning house, and Eclair pulls her weapon back out, shouting into the darkness to find out who's there. Nero gets hit with a sudden memory of a man he used to know, someone he definitely didn't expect to see as a guy with a monocle, and a ponytail steps into view, looking totally calm despite the bodies around him. Nero's heart drops and he asks why the guy is even here, because it makes zero sense for him to show up now. The man is Hilton, and he just adjusts his monocle while asking Nero if he really remembered him after all this time. Hilton stands there looking completely unimpressed, explaining that his reason for being there is actually pretty simple. He just came to get rid of some useless trash. He looks over at the group and repeats that he's only there to wipe out a tiny speck of dust, while Nero and Eclair stand their ground, ready for whatever is coming next. Nero demands to know why he's even doing this, saying he has absolutely no memory of doing anything that would make someone want him dead. Hilton just adjusts his monocle and sighs, saying it's honestly kind of sad that Nero doesn't even understand the reason he's being purged right now. The guy gets a cold look in his eyes and tells Nero that a piece of trash like him is nothing but a total disgrace to the Axis family. Because of that shame, Hilton makes it clear that he decided to come down here and handle the execution personally. Eclair finally hits her limit and starts shouting, telling the guy she's tired of listening to him spout whatever nonsense he wants. She steps forward and demands to know who he thinks he is to talk to Nero like that. Hilton just gives her a creepy smile and mocks her, saying she's quite a lovely young lady. But then he looks Nero right in the eye and says he's actually impressed that a total failure managed to seduce someone like her. Eclair completely loses her cool and yells at Nero for being called a womanizer, but Nero just looks away and tells her he's sorry. He starts to explain that the guy in the monocle isn't a stranger, but was actually the butler for the house where he grew up. Nero remembers how the guy used to look after him, right until the moment he found out Nero had a water crest and started treating him like trash. Eclair can't believe what she's hearing and asks if he's really talking about the Axis family. She gets even more shocked, asking if he's seriously part of that famous Marquis Axis family that everyone knows for their magic. Nero just quietly confirms it, but says it shouldn't even matter now since the family exiled him and threw him away. He holds his hand out and demands to know why they're showing up to mess with his life after all this time. Hilton just stands there looking smug and tells him there were basically a few clerical errors that kept him from being handled sooner. The guy makes it clear that Nero was supposed to be killed off a long time ago, and since he's somehow still alive, Hilton says he had no other choice but to show up and kill him in person. Hilton stands in the shadows of the cave and tells Nero that he really didn't expect to have to get his own hands dirty. Nero points right at him and asks if he's the one who sent those 3 thugs to attack them, and the guy just laughs and says he's exactly right. Fixing his monocle, Hilton admits that he's actually pretty surprised by how things turned out since he never thought those guys would get beaten by a talentless piece of trash like Nero. Eclair can't stand the trash talk anymore and yells at him to shut up, telling him that Nero's water magic is actually amazing. Hilton just looks at her and admits Nero did win the fight, so he guesses the magic is somewhat useful now, even if it's only good enough to work against some third-rate losers. Eclair isn't backing down and shouts that Nero's magic is reliable, and that the only problem is that Hilton and his people don't have any eye for talent. The comment about talent really gets under the guy's skin. He repeats her words as his face starts to twitch, completely losing his polite act and screaming at her for daring to mock his master. Eclair is completely thrown off by how Hilton is acting and asks what the hell is wrong with him. She keeps shouting, telling him he obviously has zero eye for talent because Nero's magic is actually incredibly strong. Hilton just sighs and adjusts his monocle, saying that if she's right, then he definitely can't let this slide anymore. He points a finger at Nero and explains that his master has already officially labeled him as incompetent. It turns out this is all coming from Marquis Gyril Axis, the big shot head of a legendary magic family. The Marquis is the type who thinks that if he decides someone is useless, then they basically have no right to live. According to him, the world just doesn't have room for a talented water mage to even exist. Hilton stares them down with this cold look, saying his master's judgment is perfect and his word is the law. He reaches out his hand and tells Nero that because of those orders, he's going to have to kill him right here. Nero doesn't even look scared, just annoyed, saying that's exactly the kind of twisted logic he'd expect from a guy like him. Nero stares him down with a look of pure annoyance, telling the guy that he's just spouting one selfish argument after another. He puts himself in front of the others, saying he knows he's the real target, so Eclair and Swim shouldn't be part of this. Hilton just shuts him down with a cold no, claiming that the moment they decided to hang out with someone who is destined to die, that was the exact moment their luck ran out. Hilton gets even more heated, gritting his teeth while saying that Nero's insults toward his master are something he can never forgive. Nero doesn't back down, shouting that Eclair is the guild master's daughter and things will get ugly if he touches her. He tells the guy to do whatever he wants to him instead, as long as he lets her and Swim walk away. Eclair loses it, asking Nero what the hell he's even talking about while Swim makes a worried noise. But Hilton just stands there and starts laughing his head off at the whole situation. He rubs his face and tells Nero he was wondering where he was going with that. But this is exactly why trash like him is so annoying and short-sighted. He looks around the room at all the bodies on the floor and asks why they think he chose this specific dungeon in the first place. Hilton stands there with his arms wide, looking at all the bodies, and tells Nero that killing them would be easy to cover up as an accident. He explains that he can even use the bodies of the guys he already took out, since those guys were actually bandits just pretending to be adventurers. The plan is simple. Once he finishes Nero and the others off, he's just going to toss them onto the pile with the rest of the corpses, making it look like everyone just ended up killing each other during a random bandit attack. Hilton gets a nasty smirk on his face and reminds them that since they're in a dungeon, things are even easier for him because the monsters around here will eventually find the bodies and take care of the cleanup for him, leaving Nero and Eclair looking totally shaken. Nero reaches for his blade and yells at Eclair to take Swim and run for it while she still can, but Eclair isn't having any of it. She calls him a total idiot and whacks him right in the back of the head. She gets right in his face and tells him to stop talking trash, because she and Swim are his teammates and they aren't going anywhere. Demanding to know why they even formed a party if they were just going to leave a comrade behind. Swim chirps in agreement, leaving Nero completely stunned by their loyalty. Nero barely has time to react when a spinning metal ring whistles right past his head. He quickly shoves Eclair out of the way, yelling for her to look out as the attack narrowly misses them both. A voice rings out from across the area, mockingly telling them they did a good job dodging the chakrams. It's Hilton, who says he's tired of watching this pathetic joke and decided he just wants to end them quickly. He continues by bringing up their earlier talk about escaping, and clarifies that he never had any intention of letting a single one of them walk away from this place alive. The old man promises to send the whole group to the afterlife together so they can keep hanging out in hell. He spins another ring on his finger and tells them before they die that his crest is throwing, giving him total control over any projectile. Hilton calls out his guided throwing technique and launches a barrage of rings that curve through the air. But Nero isn't going down that easy and casts his water guardian shield, creating a massive wall of water that stops the attack cold. Eclair is completely floored by the display, yelling about how amazing it is and that she had no idea water magic was this strong. Even Hilton is starting to sweat, asking himself if he's really seeing water magic do something this crazy. The old man's face twists with rage as he says he can't let Nero live after seeing this. He sends more rings flying, but Nero's water shield holds steady and knocks them aside. Nero checks on Eclair and Swim to make sure they're alright behind him, but that distraction costs him because one of the rings zips past the shield and catches him in the side, making him curse from the pain. Eclair and Swim both scream out for him as they see the blood, and Hilton just laughs it off, mocking Nero for leaving his guard wide open just to worry about his friends. Eclair isn't about to sit back and watch Nero get hurt anymore. She grabs her giant hammer and charges straight for the old man, shouting that she's not just some girl who needs protecting. Eclair slams her hammer down with everything she's got, but the old man is already gone. She's left standing there looking around totally confused, asking where he went since the spot is empty. Nero sees what's happening and yells for Eclair to look up. Turns out Hilton is actually running sideways across the dungeon wall like it's nothing, and Eclair just loses it, screaming about how the guy is literally running on the walls. Moving on, Hilton leaps off the wall and starts throwing more of those magic rings down at them. Nero keeps his guard up and tries to track the rings as they fly through the air. Eclair pulls her hammer back to defend herself, but those rings are moving fast, and just then Hilton sticks a perfect landing right in the middle of the room. The old man adjusts his look and says it seems like the odds are in his favor now. Hilton stares them down with a creepy grin, telling the group he's about to give them even more despair while he targets Eclair first, letting off a massive blast that nearly takes her out as Nero screams her name. He's starting to panic because those flaming rings are merging into one giant weapon, and Eclair realizes her shield doesn't stand a chance against an attack like that. Right before she gets hit, Nero uses his water jet to blast the flames away, barely saving her. Eclair is still struggling from the heat, yelling about how hot the steam is while Swim bounces on her head. Nero keeps his guard up and watches the old man, who just stands there looking completely annoyed. Nero stands his ground and shouts that he's not going to let anyone hurt his friends anymore, but Hilton pulls out a handful of spikes, saying it's unforgivable for a defect like Nero to talk back to him. The old man leaps into the air and uses his explosive toss, sending the whole room up in smoke. Nero feels a chill down his spine because something is definitely wrong. He watches the old man's movements, thinking that with those throwing techniques, the Hilton crest should be simple, but those crazy fire explosions from earlier don't fit the pattern at all. Even for a rare composite attribute, having this many different powers is just impossible, so Nero looks back at the fallen thief and finally pieces it together. He remembers exactly what kind of magic the old man used when he first showed up. He bets everything on his theory and lets loose, screaming for his water spear barrage to fly. But Hilton doesn't even move as the spears whistle past him, mockingly asking the kid where he's even aiming. Nero just gives him a sharp smirk and tells him that the attack went exactly as planned. A sudden cut opens up on Hilton's arm, catching him totally off guard as he yells out. The old man stares at the blood, finally realizing that the big flashy move was just a distraction to hide the real strike. Eclair looks completely stunned as she asks if that thing is actually a skilled jewel. Nero realizes his hunch was right and points out that the old man must have snatched that bracelet from the bandit earlier. But Hilton just fixes his monocle and says it's all a big misunderstanding because he didn't actually steal anything. He claims he was just taking back the items he had lent out to those guys in the first place. The old man gets a cold look in his eye and asks Nero what it even matters if he's using skilled jewels or not, since it doesn't change the fact that Nero is still at a total disadvantage in this fight. Eclair suddenly shouts Nero's name and tells him it's time to try a combination move. The idea clicks for Nero right away as he realizes exactly what they need to do to win. He lets loose with a powerful water jet attack, aiming the high-pressure stream right at the old man. But Hilton isn't impressed and wonders what that's supposed to do, thinking the move is useless if he just stays out of the way. Hilton thinks to himself that water magic is really only capable of this much after all. He's convinced his master was right about Nero being weak, but he doesn't see the trap coming. Eclair charges right at the old man with a shout, lifting her heavy hammer for a massive strike. Hilton just sidesteps the swing like it's nothing, telling her that all her effort is completely useless. As he stands right in the middle of the water Nero sprayed earlier, he tells Eclair she's far too slow, but Eclair just grins back at him, asking how he's going to handle a face full of lightning instead. The old man looks down at the water and realizes the danger, but it's too late to move out of the way. Eclair slams her weapon down, triggering her thunderclap hammer and sending a massive shock through the wet floor. Hilton takes the full hit and collapses to the ground, groaning as the electricity fries his system. Nero and Swim watch as Eclair celebrates, shouting out that she actually managed to pull it off. Hilton stares ahead with wide eyes, sweating heavily as he tries to recover. Nero and Eclair look on in total disbelief at what they're seeing, and Eclair screams that there's no way he's still standing, asking how he survived a shock like that. Hilton keeps his cool and explains he's been following them to gather intel, but then he mentions he's lucky he was wearing a lightning-resistant skill jewel on his wrist. He realizes water really does conduct electricity, then watches as they head into the cave. Nero starts wondering if that creepy feeling he had earlier was actually Hilton, realizing with a shock that they might have been followed this entire time. Eclair notes that he didn't escape totally fine, so his jewel might be low quality, but the real problem is that the enemy has already figured out their combo attack. Hilton smirks and points out that the group made a massive mistake. His wrist jewel glows as he says the real problem was failing to finish him off with that last attack. He launches himself into the air. Nero quickly fires off his water pistol magic to stop him, but the guy is just a blur dodging every shot like it's nothing. Eclair steps up and puts everything into a heavy overhead swing, crushing the ground beneath her hammer, but Hilton is already gone, leaving her hitting nothing but dirt. Nero starts to sweat as he realizes they're in trouble. The guy's speed is on a whole different level. Hilton just laughs at them from above, telling them that everything they try is completely useless and there's no way kids like them could ever track his movements. He zips around the cavern while Nero tries to keep up, but he's barely reacting in time. Something fast whizzes right past his face, startling Eclair so much she lets out a yelp, just as Swim gets knocked flying right off her head. Nero sees the attack connect and panics, shouting out Eclair's name. She's holding her arm and looks pretty hurt, but she tries to act tough, saying it's just a scratch. Hilton just looks down at them like they're nothing, calling them nothing more than dust. Nero's face goes dark as he clenches his teeth, thinking about how frustrating this all is. He really just wanted to forget about his family and everything that happened back then, because he finally started a new life as just himself, but it feels like it's all falling apart. He wonders why the Marquis won't even let him have that much. While Hilton stands there actually looking a bit impressed that they managed to land a hit, even if it was tiny. The guy smirks and tells Nero his plan was to just eliminate him, but now he's changing things up, pointing a finger right at them. He says he's going to finish off Eclair and the slime first. Hilton leans in with a creepy grin, telling Nero he's going to make things so gruesome that Nero will spend the rest of his life regretting it. Nero is completely stunned, his mind racing as he tries to process what this guy is even talking about. He grips his staff until his knuckles turn white, thinking about how his family selfishly threw him out, but he tells himself not to let this guy ruin things, because he finally found real friends and comrades he actually cares about. He tries to force himself to think of a way out, realizing that his acid rain magic could cover a big enough area to stop the threat. But then he stops himself, worried that using a big spell in such a tight dungeon would just end up hurting Eclair and the others. He knows he has to find a better way because Eclair actually has a family waiting for her to come back safely. And right then, he catches a sudden memory of the first time he met Master Sanders on the way to the guild. In the flashback, they were just walking along when Sanders stopped, prompting Nero to ask him what was wrong. Sanders just gave a small smile and said he was just thinking about playing around that spot a long time ago, which only. Nero notices some soap bubbles floating around and wonders what they are. He thinks that if he uses them the right way, he could handle this narrow dungeon, but then realizes that alone won't be enough. It hits him that if he combines the bubbles with the reaction from Hilton's fire hitting his water magic, he might actually have a shot. So he holds his staff high and casts his acid bubble float, sending spheres drifting through the air. He follows it up immediately by casting a water smoke screen to cloud the entire area, and a massive, swirling cloud of mist and water fills the dungeon corridor in seconds. Eclair is totally impressed, asking if this huge cloud is just another part of his water magic, while Hilton reaches out and notices the mist feels weirdly warm. Hilton doesn't think much of it, assuming it's just a cheap smokescreen Nero used because he's desperate to hide, so he charges straight through the cloud, not realizing the bubbles are starting to pop all around him. Hilton notices the small bubbles popping against his skin with a sharp sizzle. Suddenly he grabs his head and screams in pain as the liquid starts to burn him. While he's hunched over asking what's happening, Eclair tells him he better not move, because Nero stands his ground and explains the entire room is now full of acid bubbles. Hilton stays completely still among the floating spheres, totally trapped by the mist. He looks at his burned skin and can't believe Nero is using water magic with acid properties, realizing the whole smokescreen from before was just a distraction to set this up. But Hilton laughs it off, saying Nero is stuck too since he can't move or aim without hitting his own trap. Nero just smiles and says that while he can't move, someone else definitely can, leaving Hilton standing there with no clue what the kid is talking about. Hilton drops to one knee as the acid bubbles close in, realizing he's completely trapped. Looking totally panicked and covered in sweat, he begs Nero to stop the attack before he tries to switch gears, shouting that he'll let Nero off the hook if he just joins his side. He even promises to pull strings so the powerful Axis family can support Nero's house. But Eclair isn't having any of it, yelling that she won't forgive him for making fun of Nero. With Swim riding on her head, she calls out her Thunder God's hammer martial art and smashes it down, sending a massive wave of electricity straight through Hilton's body. Hilton groans and falls back, his clothes smoking from the intensity of the blast. Nero is actually impressed the guy is still conscious after taking a hit like that, but he knows the fight is over and tells Hilton it's time to give it up. Nero stands over the defeated man and tells him that no matter how much power the Axis family has, they aren't going to get away with all these crimes. Hilton just sits there on the ground and tells Nero that his thinking is shallow, just like he'd expect from trash like him. He goes on to claim the Axis family has nothing to do with any of this, insisting that he did everything on his own authority, which leads to him smirking as he tells Nero that if he thought he was getting revenge this way, he was being totally naive. Nero stays quiet for a moment, just staring down at the man without saying a single word. He finally calls the whole thing ridiculous and tells Hilton that he honestly couldn't care less about the details of who ordered what, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if he was following orders or acting alone. None of that changes the simple fact that a crime was committed and he was the one doing it. Eclair jumps in to agree, telling Hilton that he's done for either way while Swim makes a little noise on her head. Hilton just scoffs at the idea of being finished, reaching into his coat while calling Nero a naive brat for thinking it's over.